Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our board meeting. It is time that we call this meeting to order. I was going to offer regrets from Scott Templeton, but I see that Scott has arrived. Welcome, Scott. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relations, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and our schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, we learn, and we live. We will now sing O Canada.
Épopée
des plus brillantes exploits.
God keep our land.
Loyal, sings free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you, students. That was very heartwarming. We appreciate your efforts. Wonderful. Before we begin our meeting, I do want to make an announcement, and this is a message of congratulations. A couple of weeks ago, we held student trustee elections in all areas of the Durham District School Board. So we want to welcome 3 new student trustees who will serve during the next school year. And those 3 new student trustees are Kayla Malcolm from Dunbarton, representing Ajax and Pickering, Demario Knowles from St. Clair, representing Whitby and Oshawa, and the third is James Kay, who is from Brock High School, and he represents Brock, Uxbridge, and Scugog. So I want to say congratulations to those 3 students. They did a wonderful job. And I know that Logan and Arpita and Aaliyah will be mentoring them during the next few months. Thank you and congratulations to all. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. We have an agenda in front of us, but I do ask that we amend that agenda to remove the recommended action 12B, and that is the appointment of the external auditor. So I will be asking you to approve the amended agenda. Could I have somebody do that?
Trustee Morton,
Yes.
I have an additional amendment.
And what is that amendment?
Oh, sorry, I'm ahead of myself. I apologize for interrupting.
Thank you. Again, I will ask for a motion to approve the amended agenda. Thank you, Michael. Seconded by Trustee Lundquist. All those in favor? Thank you. Carried. We have 4 sets of minutes in front of us. There is one set of minutes that needs to be received from February 16th. And there are 3 sets of minutes, draft minutes, that need to be approved. Could I have one motion to receive and approve those minutes? Thank you, Trustee Brainy.
Morton, I have an amendment. Trustee Morton.
Carry on.
I would like to amend the draft minutes of the special board meeting of April 6th. The information can be found on page 19. For the draft minutes of this special board meeting of April 6th, I move to strike the preamble under recommended action, immunization of school staff and bus drivers, and I'd like to replace it with the following. Trustee Christine Thatcher reported that a motion was moved at the standing committee meeting of April 6th by Trustee Lundquist, and that a resolution was adopted by the committee.
So I'm assuming that everyone found that on page 19 of your agenda. Are there any objections? Then I'm asking for approval of those minutes. Thank you, Trustee Brainy. Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. All in favor? Carried. Moving on to community presentations. Do we have any? I assume we do not. Then I will ask Director Nora Marsh for ministry memorandums.
Thank you. Good evening, trustees, and through you, Chair Morton. The first one is an update. The last time we were together, there was, of course, extensive conversation in terms of vaccinations. So do want to let you know that the Ministry of Education did prioritize education workers, and specifically on April 7th, they said that those working with students with complex special education needs would be able to register for vaccinations. We immediately worked to create a list and provide letters to all those staff who meet the criteria as laid out by the Ministry of Education, and then worked with Durham Region Health Department in terms of giving them the information that we had, and also offering up our sites for vaccination clinics should that facilitate an increase in the vaccinations for education workers as well as other community members. They then on April 14th opened up the portal so that educators could register. So that was last Wednesday that the portal was first opened for educators. And as you know, while special education workers are being prioritized currently, it does not mean an immediate appointment. They still have to join the queue in terms of being one of the eligible groups currently who can be vaccinated. And Durham Region Health has indicated to us that it is about supply and demand, and that currently, as is the experience throughout the province, the demand is greater than the current supply. So while this is good news, it is not to say that at this time, all those involved with special education programs have received vaccinations, and it will be an ongoing process in terms of their registration. I think more pertinently, in terms of where we're at today, following the delayed March break of last week, as you know, on April 12th, at the end of the day, the Government of Ontario did extend the criteria and the factors of the stay-at-home order. And at that time, they made the decision to close all schools. So Durham District School Board schools have shifted to remote learning for the vast majority of our learners. They did say that for those students with extremely complex special education needs who could not engage in any way through remote learning, that they could still potentially access in person. So we met with administrators first thing this morning in terms of rolling out a specific criteria that schools will be working at throughout the district in terms of a consistent model, and work with families today and tomorrow in terms of those students who are in special education congregated classrooms, which ones actually meet the criteria to be coming in person. Recognize that in this period, there's no ideal situation, and that when we go into remote learning, that's very challenging for families and students and educators for a variety of reasons. But we also recognize that prior to the delayed March break, that the number of cases in our schools was escalating. And in fact, the transmission was occurring within our schools as well as increasing within the community. So we are hopeful that the steps that are being taken currently will slow down the rates within Durham. There is no date yet associated with when schools will reopen. The Ministry of Education has indicated that they're watching the modeling, and they won't reopen schools until they feel that the community spread has decreased. In terms of those few students who would be accessing in-person learning, I think it's important to note that there will be active screening put in place. So families will be responsible every morning prior to their child arriving to school to actively screen their child for symptoms and keep their child at home should their child have any symptoms. We're also introducing, in terms of when there is a positive COVID case reported by the family, at that point, given the spread that we saw in terms of the variants within Durham and within our schools, we will then ask parents to keep all children home until we receive specific direction from Durham Public Health. This is a change from the original strategy last September, and it is in response to working with Durham Region Health and their turnaround time as far as contact tracing and determining risk and high risk individuals that there might be or may not be. And so based on their advice, they have suggested we take this step. So we will be introducing that and explaining that for those individuals where they would be accessing in-person learning. However, I want to emphasize this will be a very few number of students, given the expectation of the province that we really stop movement and that people do stay at home. It will be very specific criteria in terms of those who would qualify. Also wanted to flag, given that there is no return date, we are doing an inventory in terms of technology, and we will be distributing as we can. However, you know that our technology has been depleted and orders were backlogged. As we received new orders in, we did do a replacement process specifically for students in grades 9 and 10, where the number of years that they'd had with their Chromebook was impacting its use and needing repair. So we will be taking that on over the course of this week. We did identify for families, and really appreciate how difficult this is for families. We did identify for them last week that it was really important to give school staff the time last week in terms of their rejuvenation and well-being. And then we did focus this morning in terms of the messaging when staff re-engaged our students this afternoon and moving forward, again, that focus on connection, on well-being, and understanding that people are in very different places. And so we need to be sensitive to the variety of realities that families are experiencing during this pandemic. So I think I will leave my update there, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Director Marsh? Trustee Edwards.
Thank you, Trustee Morton. Just a question. You did mention a few, and staff will know within the next few days a little bit more about it. Just wondering if once those are identified, when will the actual in-person learning start? And then secondly, it is still a parent's choice, because the parent can still, even though they qualify, they can still choose to stay at home. And then what type, even though online learning can't happen, what type of connection will we keep with those students and families?
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Macaulay, who rolled out the plan to administrators first thing this morning so that they could be working with their special education staff. And so Superintendent Macaulay, if you could go ahead, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So absolutely, our families and our caregivers are central to those decision processes. And that's why we took it back to a school level conversation with the child's classroom team and have the IEP really as the foundation. So the students offered in person will be those with extensive alternate curriculum programs. So mainly we are anticipating a fairly stable number in terms of our developmental programs. With a large number of our other students transitioning to virtual. In January, about 30% of our families in developmental programs made the decision for in-person. So that was about 30 students. We are anticipating that it is a challenging decision for them at this point and are looking forward to the outcomes of those consultations. The connection point, so thank you for raising that, is really important. And that's why the decision was made in August and September to keep our self-contained classes together as a community of learners because of the relationship between families, students, and staff across the variety of roles. And so we'll be drawing on those, as well as our mental health team tiering in some additional well-being resources to support classroom teams. For each class type, we also have a community on our staff portal in terms of resources and ideas. And so those emails are going out to re-engage those communities as we switch for some of the kids to move from in-person to virtual as well. We have asked for our data by mid-time tomorrow because if students are coming in person and access transportation, we want to make sure that Durham Student Transportation has time to plan the routing because that will be offered as well. In January, we did see a percentage of our in-person learners come direct to school and pause on transportation during the stay-at-home order. And so we're anticipating that that is also part of the consideration at this time. And then I think the only other note that I would make at this time is that we are mirroring an exact process over for Grove for our day treatment and residential treatment programs, where it's an individual case-by-case basis for our students. So some of those programs are switching to virtual, and we see some of our adolescent residential or congregate settings remain in person at this time.
Thank you, Superintendent Macaulay. Going to Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you, Chair Morton. I have two questions. They're both pretty quick, I think. The first was an observation that I made as I drove by a school today and saw a huge number of cars in the parking lot still. Are we actively encouraging staff to work from home, or are they still coming into the buildings? Because I went by a high school that had at least 30 cars in the parking lot, and it struck me as an awful lot in the midst of a lockdown order. So that's one. And then the second one is, I understand our technology is depleted, but I've also had calls twice today, because I'm not on the Rogers network, from parents who have many children in their homes, like 4 or 5, and they only have one device, and they're really struggling with how they're going to provide education to their kids. So I'm wondering if we have a plan for that for those large multiple families.
Thank you. So in terms of the staff at school, just a reminder that when we left, it wasn't necessary, although we had asked staff to think in terms of the potential that there would be a school closure. All of the messaging had been very much the opposite from the Ministry of Education. In fact, it really did appear like schools would be open. And so we did identify that we recognize that some staff may need to go in to collect materials for the teaching remotely. There will be some staff who have to access the building for remote teaching, and that is permissible under the stay-at-home order, but we have asked them to keep it to a minimum in terms of real necessity, and also that they don't congregate at all while they're there. So they go into their room and they do what they need to do in terms of virtual learning. But we are really trying to minimize the number of people in the buildings. But I think today would be an exception. There will also be some people, as we do some technology deployment, who will be going in to facilitate that deployment. However, it would be curbside pickup in terms of families who require the technology. We are aware of families who have multiple children and don't have sufficient devices. So that is an area that we will be targeting in terms of what devices we have, getting them out. We've been able to also look at our iPads. We've got them already before they contained information where they weren't necessarily easily distributed. We have now remedied that so that they're ready to go out. We're doing an inventory of what's left in some schools to transfer those to schools where families need them. So we are very similar to how we approached it a year ago, March, in terms of every device that we have in a building will be ready to go out.
Thank you. Trustee Stone.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. I just had a question about the technology. I'm assuming that most boards are short on technology, because I just wondered whether or not we ever do cross-board trading or purchasing if we can't get them in fast enough, if somebody has a surplus.
Thanks. So this is a provincial issue, most definitely. And in fact, I would say Durham District School Board has been a leader in terms of the number of devices out in the system. And that was really thanks to the visionary thinking of the strategic plan of the deployment of Chromebooks grades 7 to 12. So from the very beginning, I think we had more invested in technology, which assisted us then in being able to provide more technology for K to 6. So it is a province-wide issue, and I think actually Durham is better positioned than many places in terms of the number of devices we have.
Thank you for that information, Director Marsh. Moving on to the public question period. Do we have any questions that we are aware of?
We do, Chair Morton.
Then I would love to hear them.
I believe the speaker, there is someone coming forward to ask the questions.
And Dylan has joined us again. Welcome, Dylan. I was looking for you.
Oh, hey, I think I caught myself that time. Well, good evening, everybody. This is Dylan Reynolds here from the city of Pickering. And I have two questions tonight. And my first question is, when COVID-19 cases were going up in Ontario and in the region of Durham, how many COVID-19 cases does it have to take before either a cohort needs to self-isolate or a school needs to close? And my second question tonight is, with students moved to distance learning and schools closed, do you think the schools will stay closed for the rest of the school year, or if the schools do reopen, do you think the school year could possibly be extended into July?
Thank you, Dylan. We'll ask Director Marsh to answer those two questions.
Thank you. So in relation to your first question, it actually really depends on the contact tracing that Durham Public Health does in terms of when they decide whether a class should go into isolation or whether a whole school should. So they analyze the cases of COVID within the school. So for example, sometimes we might have 4 cases within a school, but because they're all siblings, it is not believed that there is transmission at school. And so they wouldn't necessarily dismiss the classes where those 4 children were in. However, if there are 4 cases and there is not clear evidence in terms of where students picked up or there isn't a clear pathway and there's some question in terms of whether or not transmission occurred at school, then they would isolate the whole class. And at times we've obviously seen a number of schools who've gone into isolation because of the number of cases that happened before the break. So it really depends on the circumstance and their contact tracing. I will say that during, now that the variants are more dominant, we saw them more inclined to dismiss the entire class as soon as there was one case, because it seemed to be transmitting more quickly. In terms of your second question, the Minister of Education had a meeting today where he indicated they're looking at the modeling very carefully, and really it will depend on modeling when they choose to reopen the schools. Of course, the Ministry of Education has been very clear that they would like schools to reopen as soon as it's safe to do so. Durham was one of the probably very few schools in the GTA, actually, school boards that opened on time in September. So students within this district have had the advantage of schools starting on time in September. I don't think it would be likely that the Ministry of Education would extend that school year calendar, because we did start on time, and also it's a collective agreement issue in terms of contracts and the number of instructional days, which we're still meeting the requirements for. So stay tuned in terms of the modeling that occurs. The more that we all follow the health protocols and community cases go down, then the sooner schools will reopen. Thank you for coming in.
And I actually want to say that before special education, and when you were saying in your ministry memorandum, when you were referring to most special education students will be learning remotely, are you referring to the school support program or the PLP program?
Director Marsh.
Macaulay, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Good evening, Dylan. Thank you for the question. So each of our students, just like you, is really important to us, and your individual education plan, so the goals that you're working on and the strategies form that basis of the plan. So if your school team probably reached out today, or they'll be doing so in the morning and planning with you, but it is likely that the majority of students in both of those programs that you named will be moving to virtual during the school closures.
Yeah, and I actually want to say to Nora that before I leave, I would like to say my congratulations to the new student trustees for coming in September of 2021.
Thank you, Dylan. I'm sure that those new student trustees will appreciate your kind words. Thank you for joining us, Dylan. Bye-bye. Moving on, are there any other questions from the public?
There are not.
Thank you. Are there any presentations this evening? I'm assuming no, thank you. Then I'm looking for a report from the committee of the in-camera meeting, and I would go to Trustee Thatcher for that. You are muted.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. The board approved the actions of the Committee of the Whole in camera and adopted the motions made at the Committee of the Whole in camera meeting as follows: the acquisition or disposal of a school site. Chair Morton, this is my report.
Thank you kindly. Are you moving that report?
I move that report.
Seconder? Thank you, Scott Templeton. All in favor? Thank you. Good news from the system. We look forward to good news, Director Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Morton. So I did indicate that we want to be focusing on well-being and relationships during this period. And so one of the pieces of good news is that we will be launching a strong emphasis on well-being strategies. Superintendent Macaulay and team have been busy getting that ready, and it will be rolled out by the end of next week. In the meantime, a retrospective look in terms of some of the good things that have happened in the system, and I'll turn it over to the student narrators in the video. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of DDSB students and staff, we are happy to bring you good news from across the system.
Shondell Paris is not only a DDSB at-home secondary vice principal, but she is also an accomplished professional musician and songwriter. She wrote and produced a song being played in schools across the district called Stay 6 Feet Apart, Fight COVID, to help students follow health and safety regulations and stay safe.
To recognize World Down Syndrome Day on March 21st, staff and students across the DDSB participated in the Rock Your Socks campaign. Everyone wore colorful and mismatched socks to raise awareness, support inclusion, and celebrate the contributions of people with Down syndrome.
To recognize Autism Awareness Day, students and staff at McCaskill's Mills Public School purchased custom blue t-shirts made by community member Taryn Talsma. Students with autism provided her with positive words to describe themselves to be included in the design. A portion of the proceeds were donated to Precious Minds, a charity for children in the North Durham region. At Gandette-City-Agon Public School, Vic Liu, a lunchroom supervisor, shared a video with the school community where he spoke about his experience as someone with autism. Students were so inspired by Vic's story, they responded with heartfelt comments such as, "Everyone is different and unique in their own way. I like that."
Organized by the Equity and Inclusive Education Department, Canadian folk and jazz singer-songwriter Faith Nolan joined over 4,000 students in grades 5 through 8 for the virtual event Free to Be Me, a 2SLGBTQ+ musical journey. Nolan's powerful lyrics and catchy tunes reminded students to be themselves and to stand up for others.
Abigail Dove is a grade 10 student at Brooklyn High School. She's also a budding journalist who recently helped to broadcast a Maple Leafs game. Abigail has written stories for CBC News Kids and Sports Illustrated Kids. Great job, Abigail.
Congratulations to Pickering High School alumnus Alex Cappucciti, who has just been named to the Canadian Special Olympic team for speed skating. Alex is scheduled to go to Kazan, Russia for the Special Olympics World Winter Games in January 2022. Not to be outdone, we would also like to congratulate an alumna of Dunbarton High School, Shayna Pellington, who recently played for the University of Arizona in the finals of the Women's NCAA March Madness basketball tournament. She had a stellar performance. Well done, Alex and Shayna.
There's a lot of work to do to ensure the safety and visibility of transgender youth, staff, and families. On March 31st, the DDSB recognized International Transgender Day of Visibility. On this day and every day, we continue to celebrate our students' identities and our commitment to ensuring transgender students feel seen, heard, and valued.
Putting the Parents Reaching Out grant to great use, the DDSB at Home School Community Council and administrative team have been hosting virtual wellness events every Wednesday for families. Some of the engaging sessions include how to support your child's mental health and well-being, family coding, and digital wellness. With the help of guest speakers from a range of professional fields, Wellness Wednesdays have been a great success and will continue until the end of the school year.
We teamed up with the Durham Catholic School Board for an exclusive virtual concert with French recording artist Corneille. Grade 9 French and elementary students had the opportunity to ask questions and receive a response from the well-known Francophone singer.
As students, we are excited to be part of the DDSB's Ignite Learning culture and celebrating the excellence of the system.
As you can see, the dates of significance take us to end of May.
Thank you to James and Hannah from Brock High School for reading this month's good news.
And that concludes the report, Chair Morton. Happy for any questions.
Before we have questions, I just want to note that James, who just provided all that good news, is our new student trustee representing Brock, Uxbridge, and Scugog. Thank you to both James and Hannah for a great job. Now, questions or comments? Seeing none? You're
Chair Morton, Chair
Yeah.
Morton, I keep seeing Aaliyah's hand up. I don't know if you see it there, but I think maybe
No,
Aaliyah.
I don't, so I'm glad that you have brought that to my attention. Aaliyah?
Sorry, I just keep putting up the clapping emoji.
If you'd like to speak, Aaliyah, you would be welcome to do so.
No, I was just clapping at all the good news. That's all. Sorry for the confusion.
Thanks. I think we should all be clapping. That's awesome. Thank you, Aaliyah. Seeing no further questions or comments, we will move on. We have many recommended actions that we're going to consider tonight. The first one is the naming of schools policy, and I will go to Associate Director Wright for that. David? Sorry, I cannot hear. No. Sorry, David.
It was working well at committee of the whole, so I'm wondering if you go in and out, whether or not that would make a difference at this stage. Chair Morton, I'm not sure if you want to move perhaps to item C and then we'll move back up to A if you like.
I think that's a good idea, and by that time, maybe Associate Director Wright will be able to join us again. Moving on to C, and that is the report from the Standing Committee from April 6th, and I will go to Trustee Thatcher for that report. Trustee Thatcher?
Thank you, Chair. The report can be found on pages 38 to 42. A resolution was passed by the Standing Committee on April 6, 2021, in closed session on matters involving the disclosure of intimate personal or financial information in respect of a member of the board or committee, an employee or prospective employee of the board, or a pupil or his or her parent or guardian, decisions in respect of negotiations with employees of the board, litigation affecting the board, and administrative transfers and placement. Chair, I move that the board now receive the minutes and approve the actions of the April 6th Standing Committee meeting, including during closed session, and adopt the resolution that was passed.
Thank you, Trustee Thatcher, for moving that. Could I have a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Templeton. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. I'm wondering if Associate Director Wright has rejoined us.
I have, Madam Chair. Can you hear me now?
And now we can hear you. Thank you.
Apologies for the technical glitch.
I know all about that. Thank you.
On to the school naming policy. This updated draft policy came to you first at January board after having been reviewed by a small committee of trustees. Edits were made to the draft policy based on conversation at the January board meeting. No input from the public was received through open consultation, and so the version before you this evening is the same that you saw at the March Standing Committee meeting. The recommendation to approve this updated policy is included in your package, and through you, Chair Morton, happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Associate Director Wright? I see Trustee Lundquist.
I don't have questions. I have two very minor proposed amendments, though. At 6.2, I think it's missing an A at the beginning of school naming committee. So like a school naming committee or the school naming committee. I just think it's a very minor point, but it should be there. And then the second one is in 6.2D, and I think there's a bit of a lack of clarity because as I read it, I think it actually needs an each, if that's the intention. So it says 6.2D or one school community council member representing, the amalgamating. And I think it's actually meant to be one from each of the amalgamating schools, because that seems to be sensible to me. So I hope that I'm capturing what the intention was and just seeking a very minor amendment that clarifies that.
Are we able to do that, David?
At the will of the board, Madam Chair. Absolutely. I do think that was the intent. Trustee Lundquist, thank you for picking that up. I think they're both well suggested amendments.
Yeah. Trustee Stone.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Sorry if I missed this somewhere in the policies or procedures, but on page 34, 6.1, when it says with the approval of the board, are you talking about when the name comes back to the board, it's the approval, or are you talking about the approval of the board to strike the committee or to have the committee started?
I'm just having a read through because, and I've read it twice now. I see your point because I think it can be read either way.
Could you repeat that, Linda, for us, please?
Do you want me to read 6.1?
Yes,
I don't,
please.
if everybody wants to, okay. It's under procedure 6.1. In accordance with the school naming policy and as and when that policy requires the establishment of a school naming committee shall be struck to name a new or consolidated school or to rename an existing school with the approval of the board.
So what is unclear about that?
What is the board approving?
The establishment of the committee would be my thinking.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, because in another area, it's saying that the board approves, once the committee comes back with a name, they're approving whether or not we accept that name or go with a different name. So this is with the approval of the board to have the committee in the first place.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That and I had another question about the renaming of a school. At what point do we start the process? Is it after one person comes forward with a complaint, or is it two people? Does it just take one? What is the process?
Associate Director Wright.
I think a request would be considered in the context of the criteria outlined in the procedure. So it could take one individual, or it could take a number of individuals. I think all of the complaints will be considered in the context of the procedure.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions or comments, I'm looking at page 21 and at the recommendation. So the recommendation reads, it is recommended that the Board of Trustees approve the revisions as presented. Looking at Appendix B, we have the draft policy, and looking at Appendix D, we have the draft procedure. And I'm sure that we would incorporate the suggestions that Trustee Lundquist put forward. Please use your reactions at the bottom of your screen to indicate if you, first I need to have somebody put forward that motion. Trustee Lundquist, do I have a seconder? Trustee Edwards. Now we'll go to the reactions. If you are supporting that motion, please go to your reactions and give me a green check mark. If you are not approving, then you would give me a red X, green check mark or red X. Thank you. That motion is approved. Thank you for your support on that. And moving on. We will go to Trustee Edwards, and she is going to discuss a motion regarding the establishing of a standing committee of the Board for Policy Development Management. Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. The motion is actually can be found on page 43. Basically, that the DDSB trustees change the name and mandate of the existing governance committee to reflect our responsibilities, the governance policy and accountability under the Education Act, and that the committee would be constituted annually at the board organizational meeting. Again, this is just really renaming the existing governance committee to reflect what our responsibilities are around governance and account policies, and that the committee would then be responsible to determine, to finalize and bring forth to the board the mandate of the committee.
Are there comments or questions for Trustee Edwards? Trustee Crawford.
Just a couple of questions. And there's some policies that we look after, but there's some policy that staff look after. Are we talking about all of the policies, and as they're changed or they come up for change, it would go through this committee? Or are we talking about the policies that affect the board procedure?
You're thinking, Donna?
Again, the whole mandate has to be determined. That, you know, from my perspective, it would be basically policies would go through any policies would go through that committee for discussion and for input and so forth. It makes it easier that, you know, a committee exists. But again, the mandate has to be finalized by the committee.
And so at present, staff brings policy changes to standing or board. So that would change and it would go to the governance committee?
I would see it going there, and then the further discussion could happen, and then it basically can go to standing and board.
Maybe staff could comment on just what kind of numbers would be involved with that.
Chair Morton, I apologize. I had some technology issues as well and got bumped out. So
this is just not a good night, is it?
So I'm coming in a wee bit late. So is the question in terms of the numbers of policies that would be moving forward typically?
Yeah, I was indicating that there are some policies that are procedural that we are looking after and as part of the governance. But if it's all policies, and all of them would have to come to governance, including the ones that staff would normally look after, what kind of numbers are we looking at? And ordinarily, would you bring them to standing or board?
Thank you for the question and for repeating it so that I have a clear understanding of it. So I think what we would be thinking in terms of staff's perspective is that typically we bring a draft to standing for trustee feedback and that is sort of the starting of the process. And then we do a consultation based on sharing that draft, the first round with trustees. And then we bring it back to that board meeting when we think it's ready to go or it's getting closer in terms of a work in progress. And at that point, a trustee would give a notice of motion that it would come forward at the next board meeting to be passed by trustees pending any amendments at that last board meeting. So currently it goes to standing once and board twice. The purpose of the standing in staff's thinking is that we get your feedback early to shape it. We consult on it. We then bring it back based on your feedback and the consultation to give opportunity for the notice of motion. So with the proposal of this, this committee structure, I think policy is of public interest and committee meetings are public. So we would live stream these meetings so that there's still the same opportunity for that public transparency that is currently exists within the standing meeting. And we would look at, right now we have 72 regulations that we know we're phasing into policies and procedures. And I think we've done 6. So there will be a lot of work involved in terms of phasing these regulations out, and then the policies coming into play. And then, of course, there is the regular 5-year review. So I think we would probably, pending trustee direction, view that first policy and governance committee meeting would replace it as being an item on the standing committee. And the feedback would then happen from, assuming that sort of a committee of the whole for governance and policy, so that all trustees still have equal access in providing feedback.
Thank you. Moving on to trustee Barrett.
I just think that through you, Madam Chair, we're just probably getting a little ahead of ourselves in trying to determine how the committee would work. I think we, as Trustee Edwards has said, that if this motion is successful, one of the first priorities of this committee would be able to ensure what is the terms of reference of this committee, what it should do. Because I don't disagree with the process that Director Marsh is laying out, but I just think that we're probably just getting a little ahead of ourselves in determining what it is and what it's not. And that's my only comment. Thanks.
Thank you. Moving on to trustee Lundquist.
I'm just going to put my hand down, Carolyn. That was my view as well, that we should just deal with the motion, keep it simple, and then make a determination at governance if it passes.
Thank you. Trustee Edwards has put forth the motion. I do have one question though, Donna, and that is that the committee would be constituted annually at the board organization meeting. Are we expecting that all 11 trustees would be participants in this committee?
Again, that's determined by the mandate and the committee makeup of the committee.
Okay, thank you. The motion is in front of us. Do I have somebody who would second that motion? Trustee Lundquist has her hand up.
Yeah, I'm not seconding. I just want clarity around what Trustee Edwards just said, because my understanding is that governance already has a mandate for all trustees to participate. I'm a little bit puzzled, actually. So if maybe someone can explain that to me, just so I understand what I'm voting for or against.
Trustee Edwards.
Again, governance currently does have that, and I agree that it will be, but again, I can't say 100% sure. That might be when we're looking at the whole mandate of and what the purpose of the committee is. It has to be absolutely verified 100%.
Trustee Crawford.
I just wanted to apologize. I was getting too detailed there. If this is just a motion to move this to our committee for discussion, and then we'll structure it there, then that's okay with me.
Thank you.
I'll save my questions for them.
Trustee Forbes.
Thank you. So this is, forgive me, a bit of a procedural question, which is maybe too in the weeds at this time, and I'm fine to put it aside for this time being. I guess it's a question of, would the constitution of the committee be determined? So the committee is going to be struck at the annual organization meeting. Would the determination of the number of trustees then be determined at that meeting? Or because how would we know then who would be on the committee at the next organizational meeting to determine the scope?
Trustee Morton, again, is that all has to be put together. All I'm doing is a push and say that we're going to create this, and the mandate and the organizational, we actually define the terms of reference of that committee like we do any other committee. We create the terms of reference, and that's what we're going to be doing. And that will establish all that.
Thank you. Council Cotter has his hand up, and I would imagine he's going to provide us an answer.
Well, just actually a point of thank you through you, Chair Warren. A point of clarification, Trustee Edwards. The committee would establish the terms of reference, and ultimately they would come back to the board for approval. Understood. Yeah. So I think that's
correct.
Perfect.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Trustee Thatcher, thank you. Again, I ask you to go to your reactions, a green check mark in support, a red X if you were opposing that motion, please and thank you. That motion has passed. Thank you.
Just a point of clarification, Chair Morton.
Certainly.
I'm watching the voting, and maybe I'm not seeing all the yeses, but I never see more than 5 votes. So are you seeing more that I'm not seeing then? So
yes, I did. I saw a majority.
Okay, no, because even the last vote, I only saw 5 votes. So, but if you're seeing it, that's terrific. That's good with me.
If you would like to see that again, Trustee Barrett,
No,
I would ask.
no, I don't want to see them again. I just want to make sure you're seeing them. That's okay.
I'm definitely seeing.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. Moving on. Associate Director Wright, I hope that your internet service is more stable this time because we're coming back to you for a proposed notice of motion. David?
You and I both, Chair Morton, thank you. Very quickly, this draft policy was introduced at the April Standing Committee meeting. Edits were made to the draft policy based on conversation at that meeting. And if we receive any feedback from the public through the consultation process on this draft, there's an opportunity to bring it to you for consideration at the May Standing Committee. Through you, Chair, if there's any questions from trustees, happy to answer them. Thanks.
Questions regarding that notice of motion? Trustee Thatcher.
I just had a simple question around timing. We did determine that this would be published on the board website on a quarterly basis, and I just wondered if would that be end of March then that we would begin with that, Associate Director?
Great question, Trustee Thatcher. We did have a bit of conversation about this. We felt it best that the quarters followed the term of election. And so the first term would be December, January, February, posted shortly thereafter. However, there are a couple of nuances included in this policy, including that the posting is based on the expenses in the quarter, not the expenses submitted in the quarter. And so we're just trying to get all the trustee expenses in for that quarter to post them. So they'll be posted as soon as we get all the expenses for that quarter. A little bit of a change in a little bit of a nuanced change in practice there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments for Associate Director Wright? Seeing none, we're not going to let you rest though, David, because we're coming to you for another proposed notice of motion. This one on the draft community use of schools.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. This one might be even quicker. This draft policy was introduced at that same April Standing Committee meeting. There were no changes based on the conversations that we had at that meeting. However, there's still that opportunity for public feedback, and if we do receive any, there's an opportunity to bring it to you for consideration at the May Standing Committee. And if there are any questions for you, Madam Chair, happy to answer them.
Questions, comments? Seeing none, we look forward to having those two discussions in a month's time. We have one more recommended action, and that is the French second language review. I'm going to go to Associate Director Jim Markowski, Associate Director Wright, and Superintendent Margaret Lazarus.
Thank you, Chair Morton. I'll begin this evening, and the report begins on page 108 of your package. This report is provided to trustees to assist with the decision-making on 3 staff recommendations concerning FSL programming in the DDSB. As you'll remember, our discussions began in January 2020 when accommodation concerns at Maple Ridge Public School triggered dialogue about boundary reviews, the uneven composition between French immersion and English language programming at the school, and ultimately the need for a district review of FSL programming. On January 4th of this year, 2021, you were presented with a draft report, French as a Second Language Programming in the DDSB. And on March 1st, staff presented you with the subsequent report focused on FSL capping and additional public feedback. There's a demonstrated need to develop a district-wide plan to manage the growth of French immersion programming, where the board remains committed to the importance of providing robust French immersion and English language instruction. From 2007 to 2019, the board has experienced ongoing year-over-year growth for French immersion enrollment versus English program enrollment, where French immersion enrollment has increased from approximately 8% of the overall enrollment of the district back in 2007 to 14.3% in 2019. Without strategic management, there is the potential for school enrollments to be adversely affected in terms of the impact on English language programming. Our discussions concerning the situation at Maple Ridge Public Schools stand as an example of what may shortly happen in other school communities if we do not implement any proactive planning measures. Capping enrollment is seen as a viable option to the presented concerns, which is reflected within the recommendations of the report. If we do not take action, Cataraqui Public School and Southwood Park Public School will shortly be in situations very similar to the one that we are experiencing at Maple Ridge. Capping enrollment will also ensure that school capacity considerations are maintained, staffing pressure for additional French qualified staff are somewhat alleviated, and the imbalance of enrollment for French and English programs in dual track schools are addressed. As there are multiple pathways for students to become fluent in FSL, also reflected in the recommendations is the introduction of extended French. By introducing extended French, it provides an opportunity for the DDSB to strategically manage student enrollments while providing a viable pathway for students to access enhanced FSL programming. 32 boards in Ontario will be offering extended French programs next school year. I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Lazarus, who will continue from here.
Thank you, Superintendent Markowski. So there are currently 3 recommendations along with several options for trustees to consider as they review the FSL programming situation at DDSB. Staff have proposed. Recommendation 1, phase out kindergarten in all single track French immersion FI schools. Recommendation 2, charge a partial fee for the Diplôme d'études en langue française, DELF examination. Recommendation 3, adjust FSL programming in one of the 3 ways described in the following options. Option 1, expand core French in the primary grades, initiate an extended French extended program with grade 7 entry, reduce French immersion to 50% of the program being taught in French in the primary grades, and cap French immersion enrollment. Or option 2, expand core French in the primary grades, move the French immersion entry point from grade 1 to grade 4 with 100% intensity in grade 4, 80% in grade 5 to 7, and 50 in grade 8. Or option 3, expand core French in the primary grades, move the French immersion entry point from grade 1 to grade 2 with 100% intensity in grades 2 and 3 and 50% in the junior and intermediate grades, and cap French immersion enrollment. A fulsome explanation of these recommendations and the options cited for recommendation 3 are detailed in the attached report. Now I'm going to turn it over to Associate Director Wright, who will speak to financial implications.
Thanks very much. Though the French as a second language review was not driven by finances, there are obviously financial implications to the recommendations outlined in the report. For background, our board will generate approximately $10.7 million this school year based on our French language offerings. Approximately 3/4 of that funding is generated by students enrolled in core French programming. We generally do not track FSL related expenditures during our financial reporting process as it's not envelope funding, but we did highlight some costs associated with running the program in the report on page 12. Specific financial impacts of the recommendations are included on page 13 of the report, page 120 of your package. Implications of recommendation 1 are primarily facility related, as enrollment pressure would be taken off of heavily subscribed single track French immersion schools, while other home schools may have the benefit of the additional enrollment of students as they wouldn't enter single track FI schools until they started in the program. Implications of recommendation 2 are fairly straightforward, with the magnitude of the impact dependent on the number of students applying to write the exam. It is an unfunded expense that we have seen go from somewhat negligible to noticeable, though probably not overwhelming. The implications of the options in recommendation 3 directly relate to the funding per pupil of the programs we will offer. The table on page, table 6 on page 12 of the report provides most of the relevant information. The only additional piece I will highlight is that if an extended French program is initiated for grades 7 and 8 under option 1, the funding per pupil is right in between the funding for core French and the funding for French immersion, sitting in 2021 at about $350 per pupil. And with that, I'll pass it back to Associate Director Markowski to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Director Wright. So that takes us to the end of our report, Chair Morton. We will refer you to the conclusion recommendation section that outlines the specifics of the recommendations.
Thank you. Firstly, I want to say that I understand that staff have been working extremely hard over the last 15 months reviewing our FSL policy and our programming. So thank you for your diligent efforts. I'm going to go to Trustee Crawford, who has his hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify on the recommendations. Is it necessary for the 3 recommendations to be passed to achieve the goal of not running into a situation as we did at Maple Ridge? Or are you suggesting one of these recommendations?
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton, I could speak to that. There are 3 recommendations that are presented, Trustee Crawford. Each of them stand alone in terms of trustees approving each recommendation, but you will notice within recommendation number 3, there are 3 separate options. Each of those options stand as I would describe as a package in terms of the recommendations that are brought forward. So when considerations are being made in terms of approving those options, you would need to sort of consider them with everything that's presented within each option 1, 2, or 3.
Thank you. Trustee Barnes.
Thank you. I just want to put on the table, I want to thank staff for this report. I know this has not been easy to do. It's to take a lot of intensive work. I am apprehensive about making a decision like this in the middle of COVID with, I think we don't quite know what education is going to look like next school year. So I'm hesitant about those pieces. I'm also hesitant because I can speak from AJAC's point of view. When we look at the census, upwards of 40% of racialized students are in French immersion in AJAX. So the change in or capping of this program would be very, I don't know if I couldn't support capping. I think looking at the report, I think there's a lot of different places that we could go before we get to capping. I would like to explore some of the pieces around making the changes, seeing what we can do. The challenges of our French teachers that are not in French, or it doesn't sound insurmountable, that huge to me, as I can't speak. I mean, lack of resource, lack of respect, sense of isolation, those are not things that are not that we can't change. So I would go for capping as the last resort. I would also look at boundary review, and I know my colleague Donna would probably support me with this in regards to a boundary review for Ajax and Pickering. I think there's an opportunity for balance in there to see what that would look like. The pieces around the kindergarten piece, I'm fine with removing kindergarten for our French immersion programs. I think it causes a lot of angst for parents. I get a lot of calls on those for the beginning of school year. So though I'm hoping that we can look at this and pull out pieces before we make a decision, and I'll give other trustees the floor going forward.
Thank you kindly. Trustee Crawford, I'm assuming that you've taken your hand down.
Well, I was just going to ask for clarity. Is this an all or nothing type of thing with 3 recommendations or 3 suggestions?
I think, Trustee Crawford, we will be looking at one recommendation after another. We would deal with recommendation number 1 first. They would all be dealt with individually. And I will also be asking for a recorded vote because we have no room for misunderstanding.
Well, then may I move the recommendations then so that they're on the floor for discussion? I'm not going to say a choice of any particular one. It sounds like they all need to be on the floor, even though they could be voted on separately.
So, Trustee Crawford, you're looking at recommendation number 1 only?
No, I'm looking at putting the 3 recommendations on the floor for discussion so that we can decide which of the 3 or all 3. Staff is not recommending 1, 2, or 3. They're putting 3 recommendations on the floor. So they need to be on the floor for discussion, and I'm going to move them.
I think we need to go to other people who have their hands up before we deal with the first recommendation.
The only thing is point of order, Madam Chair, and if there's a motion on the floor, it has to be dealt with. It takes precedent. So it either has to be seconded or not. That's sorry. It's just the way it works. Sorry.
Trustee Crawford, could you then again tell me what your motion is?
Well, my motion is, and maybe it requires clarity, there's 3 recommendations here. I'm not sure at this time whether all 3 of them need to pass for us to achieve our goal, or we need to select one of the 3. Either way, they have to be on the floor for discussion, either independently or all 3 at the same time.
We have a motion.
Let me ask staff, which of the 3 will prevent the situation that occurred at Maple Ridge?
So thank you. Through you, Chair Morton, if you look at the 3 recommendations, I would say certainly number 2 is separate, and it was something that came out of the French language review for trustee consideration. So that one doesn't impact enrollment in schools or over enrollment in some sites. So then motion 1 is one that can be passed on its own and isn't necessarily connected to 3, and will alleviate some of the space pressures that we have in schools. And then number 3, I think, is the one where there's a little bit more discussion potentially around the different options within number 3. There are a variety of options that trustees may choose to take or may choose status quo. So they do stand separately, and 1 and 3 attempt to address capacity issues within sites.
Chair, I have a point of order. So I'm not trying to be difficult with Trustee Crawford, but he said he's moving a motion and then he went into a discussion of the motion. So I would like to know what the motion is without a discussion of the motion. I just want to know what it is.
Trustee Crawford.
If I may, it's a little difficult to move a motion until we're clear of what we're doing. Ordinarily, when there's 3 recommendations, staff would recommend one of them, and we would decide that. So there's 3 here that need to be put on the floor, and my motion is to put 3 recommendations on the floor for discussion.
Point of order, Madam Chair, is that each one of the 3 are not necessarily inclusive, but they are exclusive of each other. If you were to put all 3 motions on the floor, you would actually be debating against parts of the motion. So I think that even if Trustee Crawford, and that's within his right, puts all 3 motions, I think we as a board would want to make a motion for separation of those so that we can discuss those. So, and I would agree with Trustee Lundquist. I don't know what we would be debating if I don't know what the motion is. So, and so just clarification, looking for just just kind of a ruling, Chair Morton, on where we go.
Okay, then I'll make it easy. I move recommendation number 3.
Recommendation point of order has 3 options, Trustee Crawford. So,
well,
To
if I may make a point of order, it's pretty difficult to discuss a motion until you put them on the floor.
Correct. That's why I was suggesting that we deal with recommendation number 1. We put it on the floor, we discuss, and we vote. Then we would move to recommendation number 2 and do the same thing, and then move to number 3. Is that not a good idea? Trustee Crawford?
To facilitate you, Madam Chair, I will move recommendation number 1.
Thank you. We have a recommendation, and I'm looking at it on page 121. The recommendation number 1 reads like this: phase out kindergarten in all single-track French immersion schools. Given the capacity issues at FI schools, removing the English kindergarten program is designed to provide more flexibility within schools to focus on French immersion classrooms. We have a motion. Could I have somebody second that motion? Thank you, Trustee Barnes. Open now for discussion. Trustee Lundquist.
I'm actually going to defer to Trustee Barrett, who had his hand up prior to me, as did Trustee Forbes. So I will wait my turn.
Thank you. Trustee Barrett.
thank you, Trustee Lundquist. It's a point of information from staff, because I just want to make sure when you phase out kindergarten at all single track immersion FI schools, been around long enough, heard the discussion at other boards, that you have to have an offered kindergarten at the local school. So are you eliminating kindergarten completely at single track, or are you eliminating, and I know it's not French immersion kindergarten, so can you just clarify? Because I understood through clarification with some other boards that you have to offer kindergarten at a school. So seeking some information.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Morton. We did look into that in terms of the language, and we looked into it when we first brought this report forward to you, which was quite some time ago. So Council Cotter, I'm not sure if you can off the top of your head, but we explored it, and certainly we were compliant with the regulation. And I think it's because it's a French immersion offering versus if it were just a regular English or dual track school, where the requirement is that kindergarten is there if you're going into grades 1 and 2 and whatnot. There are obviously a lot of different structures in terms of grades within schools across Ontario, but I do know what you're talking about, and we did look into that specific part of the Act. And Council Cotter, I'm not sure if you have more at this stage. Or Superintendent Lazarus, you might recall.
Yes, so French immersion, a single track French immersion school is the only school that is exempted from having a kindergarten class in there. So that's the only exemption.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Trustee Forbes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was just wondering, we are, as per the ministry going forward, not going to be having necessarily, after our current single track FI program, our schools are built. I believe it was a ministry directive that English boards with an English charter won't be building single track French immersion schools. So in the long run, I understand this might provide some additional capacity, but do we see this having a big impact on the pressures of the program going forward?
Thank you, through you, Chair Morton. I think, so one of the strategies we've used as a district are when we were building new sites to do single track schools, because that is more appealing than asking families who are in an English program, for example, that we experienced when we looked at Maple Ridge, in terms of moving where they've already been attending. And so it has been a strategy we have used successfully, and it is, you're correct that the Ministry of Education has said moving forward, it's not a strategy we have access to. So we can increase the number of students though in our current schools, because they're not suggesting we need to change that strategy from ones that already exist or are currently we have funding for. So it does mean then we could have more students attending that school for French immersion. Whatever number of kindergarten classrooms there are, we would be potentially then creating those classrooms and repurposing them to expand French immersion in terms of the number of classes in that site. So it is a strategy that will assist in terms of capacity building.
Thank you. Trustee Lundquist, did you remove your hand?
If I did, it was not on purpose, Chair Morton.
Well, your hand no longer appears there, but I know I went to you. So your question?
I appreciate that. So I think I'm being a little bit obtuse, and I just want to be clear on this French immersion single track issue. So if we have, it's not just about building of single track schools, right? We can't take an existing school that has dual track and turn that into a single track school. Am I right about that?
Associate Director Wright, do you want to, or Superintendent Lazarus, do you want to lead the way on that one?
You could take a dual track school and make it a single track, but what it is there's no new builds. There's no funding for new builds of single track French immersion schools.
Yeah, and I'm not advocating anything when I ask that question. I just want to be clear in my mind about what is happening. Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Edwards?
Thank you. I just, on Trustee Barrett's question, et cetera, I actually was reading a couple of the other French immersion reports, and there's a statement that we, as far as FI, we can't eliminate FI unless our entry point was grade 1 before June 26, 2014. So in the case, our FI program has been around for a while. So therefore, we are allowed to eliminate FDK because grade 1 is our entry point. If we had a policy that if we had a policy that said FDK was our entry point, we'd be in big trouble. So we're fine for that. And I totally agree with this to help alleviate accommodation problems.
Thank you. Trustee Thatcher?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Just have a question around, and I don't have any issue around phasing out the kindergarten classes in the single track French immersion schools. But I was just wondering, how would we deal with the students, the kindergarten students, where this is their home, this single track school is their home school? I'm kind of wondering if this is going to create a number of additional boundary reviews, or if there is some other way that we'll be able to accommodate those students.
So
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, David, no, you go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair, just going to highlight that every pupil has a home school both for French and English. And so it is our understanding that our English boundaried home schools would be able to accommodate these kindergarten students. And so not anticipated that we need to get into boundary reviews to make this change.
Would that mean that we would be busing them to another school, Associate Director?
I would suggest that in many cases, we might be able to eliminate bus rides because in the odd case, depending on where a student resides and where the single track French immersion school is, maybe closer than their English boundaried homeschool. We do believe in the majority of cases, we would save transportation costs by making this change.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It appears as though we have one more question, and that would be from Trustee Lundquist.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand the scope of it, because although I recognize this is the most inconsequential relatively in terms of the recommendations in some respects, well, between 1 and 3 at least. There's still an impact potentially on disruption of parental life, and I don't want to not acknowledge that. So I just want to understand how many kindergarten classes we're talking about. Like, I don't have a sense of how many kindergarten classes we have in those French immersion schools. Like, what kind of space does this actually free up?
In each French immersion school, single track French immersion school, there's 2 kindergarten classes. So we're talking approximately around about 20 classes, less than that probably.
Okay. So several hundred students though.
We did, just a clarification, when we did look at the data and we looked at when we send all the kids back to their English home school, it was 2 or 3 per school. It was not onerous at all. It was not a huge difference to the local school that each child would belong to.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to clarify if I may, Chair Morton, because I think I wasn't clear there. I wasn't suggesting that, Superintendent Lazarus. I was more just trying to get a clear understanding of if there's 2 or 3 classes, FDK, like 25, so 50 some kids for each school, so 50 times. Like the numbers are eluding me a little bit, and I don't want to vote on something not understanding what the impact is. So
it's around 56 kids per school.
Per school. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Crawford, this is your motion, so we will give you the podium for speaking before we vote.
Well, I just wanted to ask a question of staff before we vote. Will recommendation 1 avoid the Maple Ridge situation where all of this started with? In other words, disrupting one group for another.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. Trustee Crawford, Maple Ridge is a dual track school, so the conversation we're having right now is in relation to kindergarten classes in single track French immersion schools. So it would not have any direct impact to the situation at Maple Ridge.
Do you mean that we wouldn't run into that situation at other schools if we choose this recommendation?
And Trustee Crawford, can I just ask for you to clarify your question? Sorry, maybe I'm misunderstanding you.
Yeah, well, this began with what happened at Maple Ridge, correct?
So the
and we're trying to
review, that is correct in terms of the recommendations that are coming forward. But this specific recommendation, Trustee Crawford, isn't specific to the concerns that are coming forward in dual track schools. Right now, what we're discussing in terms of recommendation 1 would be capacity and accommodation concerns in single track French immersion schools. So by removing the kindergarten classes, it would provide more flexibility for us to accommodate additional students from grades 1 to 8 in the single track French immersion schools.
Okay, so I understand now we're voting on this, whether we vote yes or no, it's not going to affect what could have or what did happen at Maple Ridge. It could happen again. It's a separate vote.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a motion in front of us. I will repeat that motion one more time, and then I'm going to ask for a recorded vote, and Kathy will be doing that for us. The recommendation is, the motion is, phase out kindergarten in all single track French immersion schools. Given the capacity issues at FI schools, removing the English kindergarten program is designed to provide more flexibility within schools to focus on French immersion classrooms. That is the motion. We are now going to have a recorded vote. Kathy, are you able to do that?
Yes, through you, Chair.
Thank
I'm going
you.
to call out each trustee's name, and you can let me know whether it's a yes, no, or if you abstain. And I'll start with Trustee Barnes.
Yes.
Trustee Barrett?
Yes, but the mover of the motion always goes first, but I'm a yes.
Okay, then I'll go to trustee Crawford,
Yes.
trustee Brainy,
Yes.
trustee Edwards,
Yes.
trustee Forbes,
Yes.
trustee Lundquist. Sorry, you're on mute.
Yes.
Thank you. Trustee Morton,
Yes.
trustee Stone,
Yes.
trustee Templeton,
Yes.
and trustee Thatcher.
Yes.
Thank you. We have definitely supported recommendation number 1. Thank you. That motion is passed. Looking at recommendation number 2, it reads like this. Charge a partial fee for the DELF examination. It is recommended that the DDSB charge students a fee of, or not of, it should be for the DELF exam that is a percentage of the actual cost incurred by the board. For those where economic hardship prevents the paying of the fee, the Durham District School Board will fully subsidize those students. Do I have somebody who would be willing to move that recommendation? I am not seeing.
I will move it.
Okay, trustee Lundquist. Do we have a seconder? Trustee Templeton. We are now open for discussion. Trustee Crawford.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I was putting my hand up to provide a second, but it was done.
Thank you. Trustee Forbes.
Thank you. So I guess I have a question about the DELF exam. And forgive me, Superintendent Lazarus, it was a while ago that you presented to us and explored what that was, but it applies, it is a method, right? Well, maybe I should let you, if you could just explain it, and then I have a question about it.
The DELF exam is an exam that will give the students a level of proficiency in the language. It's a sought after exam that a lot of people, a lot of our students do seek to write that exam. It comes from the Ministry of Education in France. And there's strict requirements to that exam. There's about 5 of the 6 levels to the exam: A1, A2, B1, B2, and C1, C2. Most of our kids in French immersion do B1, B2, and our core French tend to do A2 and B1. So those are, it's just a level of proficiency of the French language with strict rules, and there is a cost to certainly writing that exam.
Superintendent Lazarus, do you mind just outlining the training we need to do, just so that trustees get a sense of the whole implementation?
Okay, so there's a written part to the exam, and there's an oral speaking and an oral listening part to the exam. And to train our teachers, our DDSB teachers, the teachers that do proctor this exam for our students. And the training costs about $1,000 per teacher, because it takes about 4 full days of training. So it's to pay for the supply teachers. So the oral, the listening, and the oral, the speaking, it's 2 teachers to 1 student when they're sitting the exam. It has to be 2 to 1. And this is why the cost is so elevated. And we usually use about 10 days to have all the students who request the exam to make sure that they all get through the exam. About 10 days it takes, so it's 10 days of supply teachers. And we have trained about 62 teachers in our board right now have been trained to do this exam with our students. And as the numbers keep rising, we need to train more teachers, because it's 2 to 1. And 2 to 1 for about 30 minutes for the oral and 30 minutes for the listening. So it's really, it takes a while for our kids to go through this exam. And so the training is quite expensive. And every year we do want to seek more teachers, because if the more we have, is the easier it will be for our kids to get through the exam time in the amount of time that we're given.
Sorry, thank you for that. And just quickly, I see lots of hands. So I was just wondering, do we anticipate that the DELF exam is more, is it core French people, or is it FI students that take it, or is it a fairly even split?
It's fairly even. I mean, certainly more of our FI students tend to take the higher levels, B1, B2, but our core French students do take the exam, and they are very successful. If you go to page 11 to 15 on your report, it gives the percentage of our students, the number of students who do take the exam at the core French level and at the French immersion level, and the pass rate. And I would like to say to you that when our students do sit the exam, about 80–90% of them are successful at the exam.
Thank you. Moving on to Trustee Barnes.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask in regards to, we talked about the training costs and the labor intensive piece of testing. Have we looked at some areas where we could change some of this cost, or we're now online? Is that an option? Is how we train differently? Is how we test in? Have we looked at some of those pieces to see if we could change some of the costs?
So the Ministry of France gives us really strict rules for the exam. For example, if we did an online portion, you'd have to still have the two teachers with the one student, but there'd be an additional teacher with the child that's on the computer in their home. You'd have to have a teacher there with them to make sure they're not Googling things as they're doing the exam. So then the online version is 3 to 1, 3 teachers to 1. But nonetheless, they have strict rules about the exam. For example, the written portion of the exam has to be written on the day that they give you, and they give you the exact time that you're supposed to write it. We don't have a lot of flexibility with the exam. We follow the rules from the Ministry of Education from France, very stringent rules.
Okay, so there's no areas by which we could reduce some of the costs?
No.
Thank you. Moving on to Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. And just the costs that are associated, just wanted to clear, the costs as are outlined in the report are actually the staffing costs. It's not a registration fee or whatever to the students. And then I have another question.
There is a registration fee, but the ministry does pay that for us. They do give us $15,000 to subsidize it as well for the first 100 students. But in our board, we usually get 400 kids plus that want to write the exams. The $15,000, although we welcome it, we're very grateful for it, it really doesn't go very long way with 450 plus kids who want to write it.
Okay, thank you. And then there was a pilot that was done by the Ministry of Education and DELF, and I don't know if the results of that have come out at this point in time, because I know somewhat was delayed by COVID, but there was a pilot that was being done around testing in DELF with the Ministry of Education and a couple of school boards.
I'm not aware of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Trustee Brainy.
Thank you, Chair Morton. Just one question. I'm a bit concerned about trying to cause any embarrassment or discomfort for a parent or a family that would try to maybe plead an economic scenario where they couldn't afford to pay for this. What kind of threshold would a parent or family have to provide to be exempt from that?
So we'd rely on the principal of the school and the teacher of the student that would give us that information. But we would certainly, I mean, there are parents who have been calling right now because for the DELF, and I've offered certainly to, if they get it done through Alliance Française, which is an organization in Toronto, we'd be happy happily to pay for them to write it. So I'm one person certainly, and as the board is, we really want to make sure that all our kids are successful and they get the opportunities that they need. And if there is, they're not able to pay, we'd be willing to pay for them. They just need to let us know. There is no threshold.
If I may add to that, I think it's similar to what we do with field trips as well. So when there are families, we will proactively reach out to those families that we're aware of, but we also include the opportunity for people to come forward, recognizing it is a very sensitive issue in terms of some people may not wish to come forward. Generally speaking, within a school, we do have a fairly good handle on those families, you know, where we have some more expensive field trips where we proactively reach out. And one of the things we could also note is that we want to, in terms of encouragement of people participating, a teacher could then say to an individual, if it's the registration fee, we can work through that. So we don't ask for any evidence. It's very anecdotal and it's based on our knowledge of students or the family coming forward.
Thank you. Moving on, Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you. It was a little bit odd for me to move this because I'm not clear on my level of support for it, but I thought it was worth having a public discussion about it. So I just want to be clear in my own mind about some of this. So I understand that this is not a part of a graduation requirement at all. It's a supplementary sort of exam. And I want to understand the value in doing that exam, what it provides to the student. Like there's going to be a reason that people take an extra exam because nobody does that for fun. So I just want to be clear on what avenues of access it provides potentially. I assume that it provides some, but I don't know. So.
For sure. I'm going to ask Superintendent Lazarus to start, and then I'm going to conclude with a bit of context setting, which might be helpful.
So it gives the students a certification for life to the level of proficiency in the language. Some students use it to get scholarships at universities. Some kids use it to get to go to a certain university to study, and it just tells the receiver that their proficiency in the language. But it is a well sought after piece of paper. I don't have it. I wish I did now, but it's well sought after. And some of our kids don't take French immersion in the high school because of the DELF exam, because it's sort of like an equivalent sort of certificate that they can take. There is a lot of prep for it that our kids go through with their teachers. There's a lot of prep and it's really relevant, authentic learning situations that they're put into. And so when they get that certificate that they're at a B2 level or B1 level, it really tells the person that they're throwing the certificate to that they are highly proficient in the French language.
And so,
sorry.
You are muted.
I know it keeps popping off and on, so my apologies. I just want to be clear about that though, because my understanding was that was like a beginner to intermediate level, the level you're discussing. And to me, that's not like proficiency that.
So there's only 3 levels. So there's an A level, and most of our core French students take the A2 level. Then there's a B1 and B2, and that's our French immersion kids tend to take that level. And the C1 and C2 is highly proficient. And we don't usually offer those to our high school students. This is also an exam that if you want to become a citizen of France, these are exams that you have to pass as well. So it's really highly regarded.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
The context I was going to set in terms of, because I think Trustee Lundquist, your question's an interesting one. It's not part of the OSSD. It is an external examiner, and we pay fees then to France for our students to sit it. And so I think the question that trustees may want to think about as we do the secondary school review, which you've approved, would be coming forward after we finish the French immersion review, and we start looking at all of the opportunities for secondary school students to sit external exams. They will start to add up financially for the district should the district choose to support them. So Not to say it's hard to know what the outcomes of those reviews will be, but I think you'll see there's a whole slate of external opportunities for students to engage in around exams that benefit them in the pathway post-secondary.
Thank you. Moving on to Trustee Templeton.
It's been a very long day, sorry. My question was based around the partial fees. I know it's in there. I read it before, but can you clarify that for me, please? What percentage of the partial fee? How's that?
We went with percentage because it's much easier to work with should costs increase, in which they are increasing. Right now, the cost of the our last time that we did the DELF, it was $50,000 that we funded for the kids to do the exam. If a student wants to take the DELF exam with Alliance Française, which is the organization in Toronto that does run this exam for people, the cost is about $195, $200. And so we would be asking our kids to pay a percentage of our total costs, which is $50,000. But I would, it's just the percentage. We haven't necessarily worked out the percentage, but it certainly would not be more than what it would cost if they went to Alliance Française to take it in downtown Toronto.
Thank you. Moving on to Trustee Barrett.
Thank you, Trustee Morton. I'm opposed to the motion, and I'm opposed on it a number of avenues, a number of reasons. First of all, the financial piece. I don't think that, and I recognize that the school board will ensure and probably have already ensured on multiple occasions, and to be able to make sure that our students who do not have the economic well-being are capable and have that opportunity to write. The second piece is, and this will be a constant theme tonight, so I'm just warning you. So French immersion brings over $10.7 million into the school board, which is not allocated to French immersion. It does not go to support it. And we're talking about, and I'm predicting in 2022 or 2023, $100,000. We have no problem taking $8 million out of reserves. We have no issue on being able to make sure that we provide all sorts of other supports. We are a bilingual country, and this is going to be a constant theme, so I'm just warning you. So I'm absolutely opposed to this. I believe this sends the wrong message. It's an element in being able to talk to teachers and individuals that have taken it. It is affirmation of the success of our program, and Superintendent Lazarus, you've talked about that there's 70 to 80% success rate in this, which I think illustrates. So I'm absolutely opposed to being able to take this. We're talking in 2 to 3 years time, $100,000. There is a project going on, to Trustee Edwards' point about trying to be able to make this more fluid, working with other boards, etc. And I think we should look to that. But I think that it's penny wise and pound foolish. But that will be a constant theme when we start to look at recommendation 3 as well. So I'm absolutely opposed to this.
Thank you. Trustee Crawford?
Well, I think that Trustee Barrett asked my question and answered it at the same time, because I'm not even, this seems to be incidental to our problem. So I would be opposed to the savings that might occur here.
Thank you. Trustee Forbes?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm coming to this as well. I guess my question would be, does this alleviate any of the pressures that we're currently seeing in our FI enrollments versus our, the other issues we're discussing? And if it doesn't, then I think there's other avenues that we would look at before. I mean, personally, I would prefer to see other avenues before we charged for this.
Thank you. Moving on to Trustee Lundquist.
I just have a point of clarification, because I understood that the $10 million was for all FSL programming, not just FI. And I just want to make sure that I'm not wrong about that. And then the other part is, have we ever, like, no, you know what? I don't need to ask that. I know in my mind what the answer is, so it's okay. So we'll disregard my second question that I didn't ask, and please, if someone could clarify the first one.
Through you, Madam Chair, the money generated that's highlighted in the report, the $10.7 million projected for 2021 is for French as second language. The bulk of that money is generated through core French. About $2 million is isolated specifically, is generated by French immersion.
Thank you. Trustee Lundquist, seeing that this is your motion, do you mind repeating that before we have the recorded vote?
So I don't have it in front of me, Trustee Morton, so.
Okay, I have it in front of me, but so I just thought we should have it. I will read it then one more time. Recommendation number 2, and the motion reads, charge a partial fee for the DELF examination. It is recommended that the DDSB charge students a fee for the DELF exam that is a percentage of the actual cost incurred by the DDSB. For those where economic hardships prevent the paying of the fee, the board will fully subsidize those students. That is the motion. I'm going to ask Kathy to record the vote again. Thank you, Kathy.
Through you, Chair Morton. I'm going to start with Trustee Lundquist.
So I'm a little torn because I think there is an equity issue that is going to sit at the heart of this at some stage, but I actually think that should be a conversation outside of this French language review, because I think it is a bigger question of equity. So I'm going to vote no.
Trustee Barnes?
No.
Trustee Barrett?
No.
Trustee Brainy?
No.
Trustee Crawford?
No.
Trustee Edwards?
No.
Trustee Forbes?
No.
Trustee Morton?
No.
Trustee Stone?
No.
Trustee Templeton?
No.
Trustee Thatcher?
No.
Thank you, Kathy. Again, we have a second motion that has been passed with everyone supporting it. Moving on to the third recommendation. This is a motion.
I think that was defeated.
Sorry, I just want to clarify, the motion was defeated.
That's right. I'm sorry. It was defeated
Unanimously.
by all. Sorry. Sorry. My mistake. Recommendation number 3. Adjust French second language programming. Given the current growth and demand for FI programming and the challenges outlined in the report, the status quo of growing the FI program without checks is not sustainable, nor in the best interest of quality French programming within core and French immersion. Furthermore, there is a need to address the negative impact on the English programs in dual site schools that have reducing populations of English students. In this regard, it is noted that the Ministry of Education has recently passed policy that funding for new school bills cannot be used for single track FI schools in English language boards. Moving forward, the DDSB is required to consider FI offerings in new school bills within the context of dual track school. That's a fairly lengthy recommendation. Could I have somebody move that motion? Paul, your hand is up. Is that to move the motion?
Yes, I'll put that in, put that on the floor.
Thank you. Paul is moving that. Do I have somebody who would second that motion? Trustee Barnes? Thank you, Patrice. Questions and comments?
Just a point of information, Trustee Morton. What motion are we putting forward on the table?
Recommendation number 3.
Which has 3 options.
Right. But my thinking is that we would either approve recommendation or not. If we approve, then we would have to determine, are we moving with option 1, 2, or 3? Do you have a different understanding?
No, I appreciate the clarification, but that honestly doesn't make any process sense to me at all. Because only in the sense that recommendation 3, it says adjust the FSL programming, but it doesn't really give us the indication on how you're going to adjust it. Unless what you're going to do is take the broad perspective, you're going to adjust the FSL program. So you're going to vote yes or no. That's really all you're going to be able to do. And if that's the concept, then you're going to have a larger debate with regards to, you're going to have to debate the options, because you're going to have to determine whether or not you support or not adjusting based upon each of the options. But we can go forward. We can see how that goes. So
to me, the motion is simply, do we adjust? Do we make changes to the FSL programming? If we vote to do that, then we have to choose the option or options that would best suit our needs.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I have a problem, because if even if you wanted to be able to change a textbook, you're going to vote in favor of changing FSL. But the options that are all there are, not workable solutions. So if you're going to vote yes, you're going to have to pick from one of those options, or you're going to have to be able to have a discussion on rejecting the options one by one and then end up not changing. I mean, I'll go with the flow, so that's okay.
Is there anyone who would like to provide further clarification to Michael's question?
Madam Chair, if there's 3 separate items, they could be dealt with separately. Now, I don't think it can be done on the request of one person. They can be voted on separately on the request of one person, but we'd have to agree that we're going to deal with them separately. And I don't see how else you can do it, as Trustee Barrett has explained. The wording of it kind of forces us into 3 separate discussions or 3 separate votes.
I'm just going to ask Council Potter what his thoughts on this recommendation would be.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. I think that while the motion may be divisible in terms of the option, I don't think it's divisible to remove the sort of the preamble of recommendation 3 to adjust FSL programming in one of those 3 ways. So I think I don't think it's appropriate or divisible to move recommendation 3 on its own to just adjust FSL programming without either tabling all 3 options, and then that would be a discussion point, or selecting one of the options to table.
Thank you for that recommendation. Now, considering what Council Cotter has just indicated to us, do I have somebody who would like to make that motion that we are going to consider recommendation number 3 and all 3 options at the same time? A mover?
Chair Morton, I wanted to put that on the table so that we can have discussions around it, similar to how we've done with the previous ones, where we have looked at each one individually and had discussions around it.
Well, Paul has put forward the motion. You have seconded it, Patrice. I think we now have a better understanding of in what direction we need to move. Can we move in that direction with discussion and questions?
Point of information?
Certainly.
Sorry, so it may be, Madam Chair, if I could just understand Council Cotter's recommendation that the preamble is necessary for the motion to stay, but the options would stand independently with the preamble. So the preamble might stay the same for each option, but each option would be a separate motion. If I'm, and forgive me if I mistook recommendation 3 for option 3, but that was my understanding, that the preamble from recommendation 3 would then be the preamble for option 1, which would be a motion. The preamble for recommendation 3 would be the preamble for option 2, and then they would hang independently. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair
Council,
Through you, Chair
Potter? Yes.
Yes, that's correct, Trustee Forbes. The point I was making was that we couldn't just hive off a motion to adjust FSL programming without also having the body of option 1, 2, or 3. But I think it's in the board's discretion, I think, to say, well, we're going to move the discussion of all 3 options, or we're going to move consideration of option 1, 2, or 3 separately. That you could do, but I think, as you point out, that would be with the benefit of the preamble for each option.
Thank you kindly for that. Trustee Lundquist?
I'm sorry, I'm frowning a lot because I'm a little bit confused procedurally. So it seems to me that the most reasonable way through that is we have a discussion about all 3 options, and then we just vote on each as though, like I think that's the logical way, instead of having 3 separate motions. Does that make sense? I mean, that makes sense to me. Is that permissible procedurally? I would think so.
Through you, Chair Morton, I think that's the way we staff, when we put that forward, that's the way we sort of contemplated it, that you would have this recommendation 3 before you, and you would be able to discuss these 3 options along with a 4th option, which is, status quo, which is not to adopt recommendation 3. But so that's the way we sort of pitched it.
So as long as we understand that each option includes the preamble,
okay,
then we're good, right? Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. So our discussion, we can look at options 1, 2, or 3. Opening it up for questions and discussion. Trustee Barrett.
Well, someone has to start it off, so I'll start it off. And I'll talk to kind of all the 3 options and try and keep my comments down to less than half an hour. So, my concern about the whole recommendation is that despite it coming forward in January, despite public consultations, despite the questions we've asked, the options still remain exactly the same. There hasn't been really any altering taking into account the feedback that we've received from the public. Now, I will say that the number of the feedback that we got was not overwhelming either. I mean, I'm not saying that there was 1,000 voices and, the proverbial 155 phone calls, that we'll get on a subject. But to me, none of these options manage FI growth. It actually stops it. This is not support of the FI program. This is a dismantling of the FI program. Now, there are some fundamentals that I agree with. A, I think we should be strengthening our core French program. How that looks like, I don't have all the best recommendations. Does it start in grade 1, grade 2? Perhaps. But I absolutely support the concept of strengthening core French, but not at the expense of the FI program. And that's what I really feel that all these options do. I am not in favor of taking hours out of the French immersion program. I am not wanting to delay French immersion instruction, whether it's grade 2 or whether it's grade 4. I am not in favor of starting an intensive grade 7 French immersion class that would be the only school board in the province that would have it, despite other boards trying it and failing at it. To me, there's a couple of pieces in here that what it doesn't do. It doesn't address the staffing issue. Because if we go forward with some of these programs, we're going to actually have less French teachers than managing what we have. Because if I've heard anything consistently from our teachers, it's if we make these changes, I'm just going to exit immersion program. Now, we can talk about that we need to strengthen the core program and encourage teachers, but we have 349 teachers that are capable, or give or take, whether it's 349 or 359, teachers that are have the ability to be able to teach French and don't, for a whole host of reasons. And I see in Superintendent Markowski's report, we're trying to understand what that is. I've also heard teachers saying, you know what, if we go forward with this, I can go teach French immersion at one of our neighboring boards, where they have French immersion starting in kindergarten. We are actually, I think, taking French immersion backwards, not forward. I recognize there's an issue, but the numbers that we have in French immersion across the Durham board does not compare or equal to the numbers that we've seen in other French immersion programs in other school boards who don't cap, who start French immersion in kindergarten, who haven't consistently being able to manage the program, who have not reduced the number of hours in French immersion. So my concern with the program is that what we are not doing is strengthening FI, we're actually killing it. We're actually going to be able to take issues away. And there's the financial piece. So there is $10.7 million, 7.7 or something, whatever it is, comes as a result of core French, 3.3 million for French immersion, but we're willing to sacrifice $1.1 million of funding in order to be able to make these changes. I believe that we need to, so Michael, it's nice to oppose everything. What are you in favor of? I'm in favor of supporting strengthening the core French. I'm in favor of being able to spend some of our dollars on being able to attract and retain French teachers. I think we need different methodologies of teaching, of being able to attract teachers. Ottawa Carleton have already hired their teachers for the upcoming school year. How many FI teachers have we hired so far for September, new grads? Because there's a different process of being able to hire. I believe we need to be able to incent our staff. I think we need to be able to listen to our teachers why core French is not something that they all want to be able to be in. We need to understand how to strengthen that, work with our teaching partners to be able to be able to put that together, to be able to strengthen it. We have to make some changes. It's our French immersion. But I think we also have to be careful is we do have an issue at a number of schools with enrollment. But we've taken that enrollment, and I have every empathy for every single school that's having issues, and issues with English and dual track schools. I have every empathy for that. But what we've done is we haven't healed. We're actually starting a different type of hemorrhage. So I'm not in favor of reducing the hours. I'm not in favor of being able to delay. I'm not in favor of having 3 tracks. That's going to actually be more difficult to be able to go forward. I'm in favor of core French. I'm in favor of being able to work with our partners. And there's this other element that came through loud and clear. A lot of parents are very concerned about making significant decisions in the middle of a COVID crisis where parents and teachers are struggling just to be able to stay in the classroom and keep their kids engaged. And this probably is not the right time. So I'm not in favor of just delaying the decision, because that just pushes it out to another generation. I absolutely believe, the staff has worked very hard, but I think that we still need to be able to tweak it in order to be able to really address the issues. It doesn't address the fundamental issues as I see it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Michael. Trustee Edwards?
Thank you. I have heard significant concerns around, even though I realize we've tried to put things on the web and we've tweeted things out, there's a significant amount of community that still haven't had the time or the opportunity to really fully digest the options that are in here. And that's what I have heard, because they're too concerned about other things. They don't have time to think. And then there are those group of people that have no understanding of what the impacts of this might have, because they haven't been able to download the 200 and some pages. They haven't been able to digest and have those discussions with the other people involved. So I have concerns around that. I agree. The one thing I do agree about is that we need to increase core French, but what does that look like? And as far as that's concerned, when I look at other French reviews that have been done by other boards, and they have put caps and so forth, all they've done is kept basically things status quo. They haven't addressed the issue. And if I look at the framework that was put together on the French immersion or French as a second language framework that was put together by the Ministry of Education back in 2015 it was, none of those issues have been fully addressed or even gone through in any strategies that have put together, even the ones around teachers. We haven't put stuff in together that we can actually significantly say, has these initiatives helped the improvement of teachers? We've been talking about putting strategies in place for over a few years about French immersion teachers and the hiring of French immersion teachers, and it seems to be moving fairly slowly. And we don't know what the impact of that is at all. I realize we have to do something, but none of these options, I feel as well, doesn't really address the issue that is, again, happens time and time again across the province. I think that we need to go back and look at a few things of things. As far as the one comment about French immersion review, as far as full French immersion boundary reviews, my colleague, Trustee Barnes and I have been saying that for years. We have people moving around, and the thing is that I can equate it. Students with special needs move around from program to program because where they're offered and they're used to it. And French immersion is an optional program. And so if we have to move those boundaries, we've got schools. Why not splitting up large schools, French immersion programs into the areas and look at the areas that we have less, where we have capacity in the English stream. I mean, it's as simple as that. There's so many things that we could look at, and I just don't feel any of these options really fully address future needs and growth and what's going to happen.
Thank you, Donna. Moving on to Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you, Chair Morton. I have one question first, and then I just would like to offer some commentary as well, because I think it's a super important issue to families in the whole district. I just want to be clear about this extended French, because my understanding from the report was that there were 32 boards offering extended French, and there seems to be a disconnect there, and I just want to be clear in my mind about that.
So thank you for that question, Trustee Lundquist. So we did a search across all the boards across the province, and what we found was there are 35 boards that do offer extended French. Some offer it in elementary alone, some offer it in secondary alone, and some offer it both elementary and secondary. But there are 35 boards that do currently offer extended French. There are some boards, there's about 3 boards that are getting rid of their extended French program. One, it was because they were instituting a French immersion program, and others because it just wasn't viable for their context.
Okay, that's helpful. So I'm going to be really blunt about core French and say I think we're failing students in core French. And I don't blame anybody in particular for that, but I'm speaking from my own sort of anecdotal experience and conversations I've had with other parents. And so I do feel like we actually significantly need to strengthen core French, and I would like to see it start in grade 1. So I support that. To me, that's an issue of equity, right? Like if French language is such a benefit, and I believe that it is, then we need to provide that benefit to more of our students in a much more significant way. So I fear that part of the challenge with keeping teachers in core French, because my understanding is a lot of the loss of teachers are from core French, less so in French immersion. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
so there's correct. Something unattractive right? There's a bunch of things unattractive about core French. And that's what I don't see being addressed in this report in the way that I think is necessary. So things like ingrained attitudes, right? And it's harder, if you start them younger, it's harder for them to just be dismissive by the time they're in grade 4 or 5, where they're naturally more dismissive. So I think that that's a really important piece. I think that the issues that are in front of us are not unique to our board, right? They are province-wide, they're actually countrywide, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. So heard a lot of parents say there's not really a problem, and there is a problem, and I'm not pretending otherwise. I have done a ton of reading outside of what was provided. Every report indicates there's a problem, but we're in a bit of a unique position because we have a really large number of French qualified teachers within our boundary. And I want to talk about that for just a minute, because I actually think this is a really significant opportunity for us. So, you know, I'm very aware that teachers are represented by federations or unions. I understand there's a collective agreement. I also understand that everything can be bargained. And we might not find the right bargain, and we might not come to a reasonable place. But I know other school boards have bargained their teachers back into teaching positions. So I think that there are opportunities to explore how do we get those 394 back. Part of it's bargaining, but part of it is being really honest about the unattractive things about core French. So the later, you know, the dismissive attitude sometimes from families is one of them, but so is the mobile carts through the schools and no place to land and no space, and not being included in planning and meetings, and not valuing French, core French, in the way that we value FI. So to me, there is actually a really significant opportunity as a school board to say, we are committed to French language education, both for FI and core French. And we are going to encourage this by demonstrating our commitment to it. So that's what I think is missing in this. When we're talking about 349 plus maybe another 40, that's a lot of teachers. That's a lot of teachers with the qualifications that we need. So I think that there are opportunities to make this an enrichment project for staff and for students, and not dismantle FI. You know, I recognize the boundary review issue is challenging, but I also recognize that we can open other dual track schools. That is a possibility that sits before us, and we're not talking about that as a possibility. And I'm not saying this is what I would propose, but you could cap it, and in a school, you have different options available to you in terms of the complement of it. It doesn't have to be that FI takes over the whole school. So I feel like I would not support these 3 recommendations, because I think there's something that is really concerning about each of them. You know, young children are more immersive in terms of learning, and I wouldn't want to take that away in terms of the hour reductions or whatnot. The staffing issue, I think we're in a pretty good position relatively to find a really creative path out of that. And I think that that is the answer. And then I think we actually involve everyone in this discussion, right? So we are in a pandemic, it is challenging. I'm not sure the results are going to be any different. FI parents are going to want it to stay the same. Core French students might not care, some will, some won't. Like, I don't think we're going to see different results, but I do think that we're not involving everyone that we should be, including federations, to say how do we do this together. And I recognize that some of this is probably addressed at bargaining, but it doesn't end at bargaining. And I think we have to take advantage of those opportunities that have arisen in the context of this pandemic to say, okay, let's rethink the way we're thinking about this. So I love the idea of strengthening core French. I love the idea of supporting teachers and French language programming. And I don't know that this gets to where we need to be. Thank you.
Can I just say just a couple of things?
Certainly.
To Trustee Barrett, we have hired to date 35 teachers French FSL qualified teachers. And we've put some incentives in place to make sure that they're up and running for September. So we're going to give them training in June, and we are going to offer to pay for we've partnered with NTIP to offer to pay for their FSL Part 1. So we are doing some things to try and retain them. And Trustee Lundquist, I'm a core French teacher, 16 years, let me tell you. So I really can tell you what it is like to teach French. I mean, I was good at it, but I do know that it is certainly an area that we have to work on. I would like to say to you that the 349 teachers, we've struck a committee already of administrators, and we are looking at tools and strategies that we can use that principals can use to retain and keep their teachers in their building. And so we are working on some of the things that you have mentioned, and I just needed to let you know that. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Trustee Forbes.
Thank you, and I'll be brief because a lot of my thoughts have already been said. You know, I agree with, you know, supporting and strengthening core French and earlier grades. We know that, you know, immersion in or introduction to a language at earlier ages obviously increases the retention of the language. You know, I am also very concerned by the number, and I absolutely appreciate Superintendent Lazarus's comments about, you know, looking at strategies to get our French language trained teachers back into teaching those subjects, and appreciate that it's multifaceted, the issues. You know, I'm constantly concerned and would welcome a focus on how we increase participation and equity for our students with IEPs in French language in core as in their achievement and continuing on through high school, as well as in French immersion. We know that's just looking at the numbers, it's so stark and really not equitable at all. So a continuation of the status quo for me isn't great, not for our students with IEPs. But I don't think that the recommendations or the options in front of us really address that either. And a growth, and I understand that that would increase the numbers of participation in the FSL program, or which is what we're trying to manage. So this has been, I know, personally weighing on myself, and I do appreciate all the work. And my one question, I guess, is and I know this involves boundary reviews, and that's never easy. But I'm just wondering about what would the impact, and maybe this is just, I know this is my simplistic view, but I'm just looking at, we have single track French immersion schools. You know, if we reimagine the whole system in its entirety as a holistic being, and we kind of do an overall view of you know, single track, dual track, you know, what does that look like? What are our options, and what does that, can we reimagine something that isn't necessarily captured in these three options?
For sure. I may start the staff response and go from there. So I think there's a few pieces. One is the idea around creating more dual track schools. And so that is something we can examine. I think the question we will encounter, and you're right, French immersion is incredibly popular in terms of families wishing to have it. And so as we introduce more dual track schools, the question will be, what does the English program look like in those dual track schools over time? We've tried to track the increase of French immersion proportionately compared to the increase within the board. And so try to not limit, but keep it proportionate in terms of where we're looking at it. So could we go back and look at then introducing some dual track schools and try to keep a balance? I think the challenge we have sometimes with dual track schools over time is what the board experienced a year ago, January. And so that will be the question in terms of looking at different models and re-examining it, as Trustee Forbes has suggested. So there's certainly an opportunity for us to look at some schools that right now, I mean, that was how French immersion landed at Maple Ridge initially, right? It was a school that was under capacity, and it was a solution to increasing the enrollment at the school so that the school wasn't in danger of closing. And so fast forward, and the situation we had a year ago, January, is it's, you know, 148%, I think, capacity, and the English program is very small to the point where we were looking at triple grades. And again, stacked classes aren't necessarily negative, but sometimes they're perceived to be that way just because of the lack of new social opportunities or having the same teacher 3 years in a row. So there's certainly other opportunities we can examine and do our best in terms of keeping French immersion as a request and as a choice. Our intention with the extended French was to provide an opportunity for that desire for French language learning, but delay that choice to the point where our K-6 programming wasn't necessarily impacted in the same way in terms of English programming. So we didn't change the recommendations in terms of when we first brought this forward. We provided a few options for your consideration, understanding that none of these options might be attractive to you. I'm not sure if doing all of the boundary reviews and creating dual track schools will be any more attractive. But in fairness, we didn't map that out in terms of what that could possibly look like. We do know that we have some schools coming up where we're going to need to make some decisions. The pandemic has been in some ways an interesting delay for us because of having students attend virtual. The enrollment pressures have been solved because some students have chosen to go into the virtual school. And we anticipate that that will happen again next year. Certainly the beginning of the year wouldn't be regular, but I think we do have a reality that there are a few schools short term. And does that provide us an opportunity to look at some longer term and maybe have more hubs in terms of busing? If we're going to add some dual track schools, again, those add layers in terms of the management of it proactively. So Trustee Forbes, there is an opportunity for us to go back at it and have a look at school by school and doing a boundary reviews in terms of area boundaries. So I think that would be the way forward should the trustees not support any of the options that were currently outlined. The other thing in terms of the core French and retaining of core French teachers, I think the other thing that we need to identify is that teaching is really relationship based, and there are some teachers who thrive in seeing all those students and spending a short period of time in them in a day and over a week, and they get to see them over multiple years, and so they get fulfilled that way. There's a lot of educators though who really thrive in the sense of having their class and seeing their class throughout the day. And so we're totally open, and Superintendent Lazarus has already started those conversations in terms of what are the things we can do, because we have ruled out the idea of portables given the expense to the district and lack of space in some places in terms of dedicated classroom space. But there are other things we can definitely pursue. But I don't want to mislead in terms of the push and pull factors, in terms of getting the job and being excited to get a job teaching core French, and 3 years later really wanting to have your own class. And I do think that is a reality because education is so relationship based in terms of that day. So totally open, Trustee Forbes, to us looking at those pieces. I think it would have to be more piecemeal then in terms of how we do those boundary reviews, where we identify some opportunities, but we do know that we have one urgent situation, which is Maple Ridge, that we've been saved a wee bit because of the pandemic, but we will need to make some decisions about it.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm you know, I do support some aspects of these options, and I think they make a lot of sense. But I thank you for your thoughtful response and all the work really and participation of, you know, everyone who's had come to the meeting or at our last standing and made presentations. And I do really appreciate everyone's efforts in this for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Marsh. I think Trustee Thatcher, you did have your hand up. Have you taken it down?
Well, there's really been so much said by everyone. I could make a couple of comments maybe that were something a little bit different. First of all, I do feel that we have a tremendous opportunity to increase and improve our core French program for sure. However, if we're going to be looking at providing 20 minutes of French instruction in the primary grades, I don't think that will be worthwhile at all. So it has to be a little bit more. So some consideration around the programming. I think this is, as far as core French is concerned, there's more than just, there's one of the things that makes it a kind of an unpopular area is the fact that in many schools, it's kind of a lonely position because there's only 1 or 1.5, 1.5 French teachers. So it's, you know, it's difficult to find someone to collaborate with, at least in the school anyway. The only other thing that I would say that's probably not been said is around the expansion of our secondary course offerings, French course offerings. And I just feel that if we're capping if we're capping in grade 1, and given the current attrition rate from grade 8 to secondary, just wonder what the plan would be. How would we be better able to expand the secondary French course offerings? I guess that's probably, I'm not really in favor of any of the options entirely. I did try to look at each one and see where they came from, what you were thinking when you put that forward, because I know a lot of thought and effort has been put into this. When I looked at option 3 and I looked at the entry point move from grade 1 to 2, I could see some benefits with that, in the fact that our students then would have instruction in, well, I'm going to say their first language, 1 more year. And additionally, it might just give parents a better understanding of whether or not, you know, French immersion was an option for their particular student. And the 50% in junior grades, which I know is an improvement over what we currently provide, at least I recall, for grade 4. So that's just maybe a couple of additional points to be made. Thank you.
Thank you for, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I apologize, Chair Morton. I was just going to answer the question in terms of secondary programming. Would you like me to do so now?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the intent, one of the things around secondary program, there is a high attrition rate. And, you know, there is that question of which happens first, because there is one, we know, between elementary and secondary, but there's also an attrition rate all along. And part of it is having timetabled and being an administrator in these schools, it is tough to get the timetable so that students aren't defaulting out, especially in grades 11 and 12. The idea behind the extended French was potentially that it would feed and sort of have an entry point that's closer to secondary, because by grade 7, then the idea of doing the 5 years can become more likely potentially than if you signed up in grade 1. You may very well change your mind along the way. And so we do see some attrition there. So the idea of the secondary course offerings, we did think with the extended, there was potentially an opportunity to rejuvenate a late entry in terms of secondary school course offerings then. We have also talked about lessons learned over the course of this year. And while it's not ideal and we need to really consider these pieces carefully, where there's potentially an issue with the school not having enough sections, and currently we do some supporting of additional sections to schools for French immersion where the sections are small. Do we start looking at some sharing opportunities between schools in terms of virtual? But we're not there yet. We feel like we need to do a lot more consideration in terms of the impact on students, and especially around language learning, how that would feel and look. I know that have been involved in some pilot projects around First Nations language learning through virtual opportunities, and it was very challenging. So I think that's something we'll have to consider and monitor in terms of growing the program and then seeing what sections are available. And perhaps part of the decision is that we continue to where we need to provide some additional support for those opportunities.
Thank you very much, Nora.
Thank you. Trustee Barnes, you did have your hand up, then it went down, and then it's back up. Did you have a question?
Sorry, I did have a comment. Sorry, I got kicked out of the meeting, so I'm not even sure where we are. I just had a question, comment in regards to the French programming, and I said it when we just started, maybe not at the right spot. So I just wanted to insert in here right now the piece around our French immersion programming not being an elitist program right now. We have racialized students, we have marginalized students, and I want to make sure that we're not then creating something that other school boards are striving for in regards to offering opportunities to to a broad selection of our community. I think that I wouldn't be able to support the options of 3, because I do think that we're not really doing justice to the things that for our French immersion program or for our core French program. I agree, we need to strengthen our core French program. I don't think it should be at the expense of the FI program. And I hope that when we're going back to the drawing board to look at things that will even involve some of the stakeholders that have presented at board, to see what other options could be done to strengthen those programming. And so I wanted to just thank trustees for the engagement and the feedback and conversations that we've had so far. And I'm hoping that we'll even look at the hiring piece, because we've hired 35 teachers, but I'm worried that we'll be the same spot next year where those 35 will then be in our system and not teaching French. So we really need to think about the commitment that those teachers have. I know other boards have a varying degree of commitment from teachers. Some have them tied in for 5 years. There are a lot of different pieces that are involved. So I'm hoping that as a board, we'll also look at those too. So we're not then looking at 35 teachers that we've hired that are not teaching French in a year or two. So those are the pieces that I wanted to put on the table. And we talked about the boundary review, and I'm hoping that as we do boundary review, that we won't just look at small areas, but we'll take this time, as Trustee Forbes have said, to look at the entire system to see what that looks like. What would a boundary review look like? Not just for Ajax, but for the system in itself, because we have a planning committee that is usually pretty good at projecting numbers. So I'm hoping that we'll do not just one-offs, but a full system review. And I just want to thank staff, because this has been a journey and a long one. And I know there's been a lot of work put into this, but I just think that the decision that we'll make will ripple for years to come. And I just want to make sure that we've looked at every possible option before we cap or before we reduce a program that is serving our community, because we have such a large amount of our community that want to take our program. So I just want us to be cautious as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Barnes. Good ideas. Trustee Stone.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I won't reiterate a lot of what my colleagues have said, but I can say that I agree with most of what's been said. Before we do any sort of capping, I would really love to see the capacity of the schools that are not over capacity be filled before we start capping our other schools. And with extended French, the attrition starts in French immersion in grade 3 and goes on right through high school. It's 55% attrition rate. It's really high. So I'm wondering whether or not we could give the option for students to cross over earlier rather than grade 7. The other thing was, if the government changes, there's a possibility that funding will be given again for single track French immersion schools. I think I'm correct in that. It could change. Sorry, I've lost my thought. Last one. Just the core French. That's what I was going to go up. The core French is so important to me because I think you're on the right track of starting in a grade 1. And I think we lose a lot of teachers because of the way it's taught. We don't teach our core French students the way we start teaching our FI students. We don't start in grade 1 with our FI students conjugating verbs, I don't think. Do we, Margaret? I don't think we do. It's okay. You're muted. But so I think if we change the way we're teaching core French, which would be with conversational French, a lot of the French teachers would appreciate that. And I think they would be more interested in staying within the core French program. And what Trustee Lundquist was saying about the core French teachers feeling that they're a part of that school, maybe having an actual classroom for them, they need to feel like they are included in that. So I also see in the future, some of trustees will not be happy with this, but I do see in the future, and it's already happening now, that the French immersion is eclipsing the English. And at what point are the two programs going to have to merge and we teach all students the same way and they all come out bilingual? They do it in other countries. It's all in one school. They don't build separate schools to teach the language. It's all done in one school. It's all one program. So why are we not teaching our core French students the same way we're teaching the French immersion students? And eventually it's going to all come together. Our core French students are doing really well when they're writing the DELF. I know some of them have switched over from French immersions, probably from some of the attrition, but they pass that exam. Maybe it's at a lower level, some of them, but they're doing really well. If we improve the core French, those students, there'll be more students being able to write it 100%. And so I do have a big push for the core French. But I also, the capping, I'm very uncomfortable with. And I agree that I would like to stay status quo until we come back with a few more options. Thank you.
Thank you. Many people have had an opportunity to express their concerns, but I see that a lot of us, we have similar feelings. Most of us want a strengthening of the core French program. We want to encourage our French teachers. We're uncomfortable with any of the three options. So I'm asking you, do we look at recommendation number 3 and put forward a motion with other options? Or do we ask staff to go back, reconsider those options and come back to us considering all of the input that we have provided? So I'm asking you for how you feel we should proceed. Darlene.
Thank you. So I mean, we could put together, I guess my question is, if we put together a motion that, say, worked towards strengthening core French or had some of the options, but without the capping, without the limitations. And would that be helpful at this time? Or does this really require, given the feedback that you've had, additional options? And I'm sorry, I'm tired, so I'm not making a lot of sense.
Thank you. Michael, do you have any ideas on how we should proceed?
I do. We have a motion on the table.
Yes, and that's right. And Nikki was before me, so I was
Okay.
going to say the same thing. We do have a motion on the table, so.
Okay, that motion on the table was put forward by Paul, seconded by Patrice.
I think we should, Madam Chair, I think we should vote on that motion. And then talk about other options at that point.
Thank you. Then I don't think I need to read that lengthy recommendation, that motion. I'm going to ask for another recorded vote. Kathy, are you able to do that?
Yes, through your chair, I will record the vote.
I'm sorry, I think this is a point of information. Or it might be a point of something else. I'm too tired to remember at this stage. But it seems to me that we have to do 3 separate votes, right? We have to vote on number 3, option 1, number 3, option 2, number 3, option 3, just to make sure that we have covered those. Am I wrong about that? That's what I understood at the beginning.
Then I am going to go to our council to give us direction on exactly how we should manage this motion.
I think all 3 options were tabled as part of the initial motion. So I would agree with Trustee Lundquist. My recommendation would be that there be a vote on option 1, there be a vote on option 2, there be a vote on option 3. It could be at the end of the day that none of those options carry, but then that would be the result.
So you are suggesting then that we have 3 recorded votes, 1 for each option. Am I correct, Council?
Through you, Chair Morton, correct. That's my recommendation.
Okay. Then we would be looking at option number 1. As a reminder, option number 1 reads, expand core French in the primary grades, initiate an extended French program with a grade 7 entry, reduce French immersion to 50% of the program being taught in French in the primary grades, and cap French immersion enrollment. Michael? Comment?
No, that's sorry, I was from before. I apologize.
Okay. I'm also looking at our time, and we have a very limited time left before 10 o'clock. So before we address that vote, could I have somebody provide us with a motion that we could extend this meeting past the 10 o'clock for 1 hour if we need be? Michael, you will do that? Seconded by Nikki. All those in favor? Thank you. Option number 1 then, Kathy, I'm asking you to again do the recorded vote. Kathy, are you there?
Sorry about that. Through you, Madam Chair. I'll start with Patrice. Trustee Barnes?
Against.
Trustee Barrett?
Opposed.
Trustee Brainy?
Opposed.
Trustee Crawford? Trustee Crawford? Trustee Edwards?
Opposed.
Trustee Forbes?
Opposed.
Trustee Lundquist?
Opposed.
Trustee Morton?
Opposed.
Trustee Stone?
Opposed?
Trustee Templeton,
Opposed.
and Trustee Thatcher.
Opposed. Thank you for that, Kathy. Again, we are all in agreement that we are opposed to option number 1. We will then look at option number 2. Option number 2 reads,
I'm sorry, I'm just concerned because the mover of the motion isn't here and he can't move the motion if he's not here. So I don't know procedurally what is supposed to happen.
Paul, did you go out, come in?
He's not online.
He's not online.
Maybe let's call him.
Through you, Madam Chair, the motion was tabled and seconded. It's the motion of the board at this point. So Trustee Crawford presence is not necessary to continue with the vote on the motion.
Thank you. Option number 2, expand core French in the primary grades. Move the French immersion entry point from grade 1 to grade 4 with 100% intensity in grade 4, 80% in grades 5 through 7, and 50% in grade 8. That is the motion. Consider it, and I ask Kathy to do another recorded vote.
Through you, Chair Morton, I will start with Trustee Barnes.
Against.
Trustee Barrett,
Opposed?
Trustee Brainy,
Opposed?
Trustee Crawford, Trustee Edwards,
Opposed?
Trustee Forbes,
Opposed.
Trustee Lundquist,
Opposed.
Trustee Morton,
Opposed?
Trustee Stone,
Opposed.
Trustee Templeton,
Opposed.
and Trustee Thatcher.
Opposed. And we've definitely decided on option 2 as well. Very definitive. Option number 3 reads, expand core French in the primary grades. Move the French immersion entry point from current grade 1 to grade 2 with 100% intensity in grades 2 and 3, 50% in the junior and intermediate grades with a cap on French immersion enrollment. Think about that, and I'll ask Kathy to again perform a recorded vote.
Through you, Chair Morton, I will start with Trustee Barnes,
Against.
Trustee Barrett,
Against?
Trustee Brainy,
Opposed?
Trustee Crawford, Trustee Edwards,
Opposed?
Trustee Forbes,
Opposed.
Trustee Lundquist,
Opposed.
Trustee Morton,
Opposed?
Trustee Stone,
Opposed.
Trustee Templeton,
Opposed.
and Trustee Thatcher.
Opposed. Obviously, then, we will not be able to support any of the 3 options under the 3rd recommendation. I'm going to leave it up to staff to determine how we move on with our French review from this point. Any comments from Director Marsh?
Yes, Trustee Lundquist had her hand though, so I'm not sure if she wished to speak before I did.
I was actually going to suggest that we ask Director Marsh for her views on how to proceed before we try to pass difficult, complex motions.
Thank you.
Good idea. Director Marsh.
So my suggestion at this stage is that perhaps you don't pass a motion, and that, you know, we've heard very clearly in terms of the interest in the pedagogy and core French and some of the work we do there in terms of keeping French teachers interested in teaching core French. I think that I don't think it's possible to do a system-wide boundary review. And I want to be upfront in terms of our capacity in delivering that. So my suggestion is we will bring forward to you a plan in terms of area by area boundary reviews, trying to address the most pressing issues first, but we would not be able to do one for the entire district. It just isn't feasible, to be perfectly honest with you. The number of years it would take us to actually undertake that study, it would be constantly changing. So what we can do is identify through capacity issues where our most pressing issues are and start addressing it and bring forward a plan in terms of what that could look like. We heard from you in terms of some interest potentially in whether or not we look at the few schools that are low enrollment and whether or not we look at dual track in those. So we could potentially look at that as part of the planning process and bring that forward to you. So I'm not sure a motion is required, but we can move forward in that direction.
Thank you for that consideration. And we really do very much respect the work that you have done in this review over the last 15 months. We realize that this has been a tedious task requiring much attention and time on your parts. Thank you for your work. Are we able to move on to information items? I think everyone is getting a little tired, aren't we? Then I would go to Superintendent Andrea McCauley, and she is here and she's willing to talk about her mental health update. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. The purpose of this report, which begins on page 367 of tonight's agenda, is to provide information on the implementation of a tiered approach to mental health and well-being supports that are put in place for students across the Durham District School Board, as implemented by our mental health leadership team, as well as our psychological services and social work teams. Partnerships are an important foundation of mental health and well-being. We thank students for their trust, families for welcoming us at some of their most vulnerable moments, and partnerships internal to the district and with many community partners as a fabric of supports is in place across the Durham region. Our commitment is to enhance and protect student mental health and to continually promote well-being for staff and students. Well-being and mental health are fundamental to student achievement. Building on a foundation of supporting mentally healthy classrooms, our teams serve through a tiered model of services which continue to be agile in meeting the needs of our students. A tiered approach of supports move through all, some, and few, providing the framework for structuring supports for our students. Promoting mental health and well-being universally for all students, our Tier 1 or all approaches help set the conditions for learning. And the strategies include, which are highlighted on page 368 of your package, a pilot program for well-being youth workers who are co-facilitating programs in classrooms alongside our educators, compassion fatigue training supports for staff, and the creation and sharing of the resource addressing anti-Black racism and its impacts, a well-being toolkit for families. Throughout the pandemic, we are experiencing an increase in student-reported concerns related to low mood, worry, and feelings of isolation and fear, as well as experiences of anxious feelings and challenges related to the loss of sports, artistic forums, and other forms of expression, which are having an impact on motivation and connection for our students. Frontline mental health staff are noticing an increase in concerning coping behaviors, such as the use of substances, disengagement from school, and a general loss of connection or sense of feeling of connection to schools and communities. We also note increased stress on our parents and caregivers, those who are required to work in person and those who work from home and support student learning needs, as well as supporting children who may be missing the routine and structure of being in school. With all of these factors in mind, our teams have increased focus on our Tier 2 and Tier 3 strategies, which include those highlighted on page 369. We've increased our staffing equivalency for both social work and psychological services, as additional professionals equates to an increase in direct service for students. We've increased the agility of our services including the introduction of group supports, which center between the whole class and individual clinical supports. And we've worked to remove barriers to access for our services. Our service model continues to evolve within each of the teams involved in their Tier 2 and Tier 3 work. Our board commitments to equity and human rights are embedded within the professional learning and service shifts as our teams are engaged in dismantling practices that disproportionately impact students and families, as well as those that have bias embedded within them. Actions include professional learning, which centers on an understanding of the impacts of racism and privilege on mental health, and bias within our tools, such as those with Eurocentric assessment norms. We are on a journey with a commitment to our students and families and continually grow in our responsive practices. The foundations of our mental health and well-being strategies plan are welcome, include, understand, promote, and partner. These commitments continue to inform decision-making across all 3 tiers of supports for our students and families. This report is provided to trustees for information. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Superintendent McCauley. I don't have a question, but I do have a comment, and I am so excited about this. Brock High School has invited me to attend a mental health evening. So on Wednesday, April 28th, they are having an evening addressing the mental health of students and staff. We have many staff members who are going to be providing workshops. One of those staff members is our mental health lead. So I'm excited to attend, and I'm wondering, Andrea, if there are other schools doing similar events.
Thank you, and through you. So absolutely, there are our teams. So how we've structured this year, and it's between Inclusive Student Services as well as with Positive School Climate with Superintendent Crosdale. We have our leadership team, which forms our mental health lead, as well as our 2 clinical chiefs and our Positive School Climate officer, as well as the teams that work with them. Because we really see mental health and well-being as the foundation of the work of all of our teams. So we have psychological services and social work team members who have been presenting at school events, present within staff meetings, building capacity, and then as well the individual leaders, such as Stephanie, as you referenced, for Brock High School coming up, have been engaged in community events. Another one that comes to mind is Blair Ridge Public School recently had one where Stephanie was the keynote for them as well. So the team is quite active, but we see that as a large team responsibility and commitment across the system. As we leverage those regulated health professionals that bring that mental health background, who are embedded in our school communities, because we know that if the students and families feel a connection, they may be feeling safer to engage in some of those clinical pieces when they need to. So we see that as part of the relationship building. So definitely occurring across the system. Thank you for your question. Thank you for highlighting the upcoming event too. We're quite excited.
I am excited to attend that event. Going to Trustee Stone.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Just looking at page 369, I just had a question about, you've got here service pathways and access options for students and families were revised to allow for direct access to Tier 1, Tier 3 mental health services. And how are these families accessing this?
So thank you, through you, Chair. So currently we have, what we've added this year is the button on the website so that families don't have to go through a school team to voice a concern to come through. Our regulated health professionals have always had confidential voicemails and emails, but it can be tricky to get to them. So we just wanted click and a member of your mental health team will connect back with you. One of the largest pieces for removing barriers this year was moving to verbal consent. And so if a family gives verbal consent, then the school's able to share as well. And then the regulated health professional moves through that informed consent so that we're not dependent on paperwork for individuals that are in risk situations. And that moves the process faster because we really want students and families to have a ready connect when they're expressing or showing signs of stress or need. So just different aspects as we look at that. We also have started moving some of our professionals across school sites to do support in areas of either lived experience and direct alignment with families seeking support, or with the background of our professionals to meet student needs, and that can increase the efficacy of the relationship and speed up service as well for more positive impact. So lots of different layers in terms of how kids access support, and then what the support looks like for them when they're engaged in that relationship. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Superintendent Macaulay. I see no other questions or comments, so we will move on to Trustee Edwards and the SEAC meeting report.
Thank you, Chair Morton. I have I'll end up having two motions, but the report from the SEAC meeting of February 18th can be found on pages 371 to 380. As we are behind, the SEAC asked us also to bring forward a motion on an alternate for Easter sales. So first we'll look for just an approval of the report, or receipt of the SEAC report, and then I'll motion the alternate number.
Because this is an information item, do you need to have a motion to receive?
Most of the times we have, because it's a statutory committee, but if you don't want to, that's fine.
No, that's fine. Then you're moving receipt of that report. Could I have a seconder? Trustee Forbes, all in favor? Thank you.
And then
moving on. Yeah, go ahead, Donna.
Basically at the April 8th meeting, there was a recommendation made by SEAC for the board to approve that Christina Salisbury will be the alternate SEAC member for Easter Seals, Ontario. And I'll make that motion.
We have a motion. We have a seconder, Darlene Forbes. All in favor? Thank you.
Thank you.
That is carried. Moving on to Trustee Barnes with an OPSPA report.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. OPSPA had their central meeting April 10th, Saturday, April 10th. They discussed the OPSPA priorities that going into next year, whether or not the priorities that are standing now are relevant, whether they needed updated. They discussed with different boards what have worked during COVID, so some best practices and some success stories in regards to some of the things that have worked for different boards, especially looking at urban and rural boards to see what practices have worked. Boards also discussed the school resource officer programs. So boards shared which school boards still had those, how they were working, what were some of the impact on their families and students. The Project Compass, which is the priorities, the governance piece of OPSPA, sent out a survey to trustees. So could trustees just pay attention to that and give their feedback around OPSPA governance. And there's also an equity audit that has been engaged for OPSPAs. So they're presently getting their policies and procedures audited and looked at through an equity lens. So that's the other big project that's ongoing. And that is my update.
Thank you, Patrice. Moving on to correspondence, we all have received many letters from school boards throughout the province, but I would like to draw your attention to the letter that we received from Metrolinx. I think it was a very positive letter, and I would like to thank Trustee Edwards, Rob Zerchanik, and a representative from SEAC for meeting with Metrolinx and providing our point of view, because I think they definitely respected having you at that meeting. Further comments regarding correspondence? Seeing none, I think that we are able to adjourn this meeting. Thank you for your patience. Oh, Patrice, are you speaking or you simply want to say good night?
I was just adjourning. I'm just voting to adjourn.
Let's vote to adjourn. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.